Board of Directors to order.
Stephanie, if you want to go ahead and take a roll call. Attendance.
Alvin Vandenbrink. Carrie Dennison.
Here.
Francie Jacober.
Here.
Gary Martinez.
Here.
Kathy Chandler Henry. Mark Catlin.
Here.
Mark Rober.
Here.
Mike Richard.
Here.
Rebe Hazard. Here. Scott McGinnis.
Here.
Sonia Chavez. Here. Sonia Macy. Sandy Henry. Bruce Beckley.
Here.
Tom Britton.
Thank you. Mr. President, we do have a quorum. I will just look at Mr. Vandenbrink, let us know that he is stuck in traffic, but is on his way here. I assume that's where Director Gray is as well, since they'd be coming from the same direction. And Director Chandler Henry reported that she was double booked today at a 4-H event and picked the children's animals over you all. So that's how it is. She's going to do her best to be here tomorrow. She, of course, did not put it that way. That would, you can attribute that statement to me, not her. But she's apparently a judge in the events. And Director Macy's is at a National Association of County Officials. And he's unable to keep it. She did indicate she would try to zoom in, listen, but not vote or participate. Given the board's policies on that. We do have a quorum. The one thing on the agenda that we'd like to add, which is under staff report, so it's item 6. We'd like to add a new 6E, which is the Colorado River District wildfire role. I'd like to kind of update the board on what staff has defined as our role and make sure that the board is in agreement with us on that. It would then move the subsequent items to the F, G, H, I, and the new J. So with that, we'd like to ask the board to make a motion to approve the amended agenda.
Seconded. Motion by Jacober, second by Dennison. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion passed.
Next is the consent agenda. Motion to approve that. There's discussion.
We'll need a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved, Director Chavez.
Chavez, second. Second, Rover. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion passed.
Next item is the legal
Reports.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would make a recommendation that the board convene into executive session pursuant to CRS section 24-6-402, paren 4B and E, to discuss the items listed at agenda tab 3.
We need a motion to proceed into executive session.
So move, Hazard.
Hazard moves, second. Quickly. Got 3 seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
I will move into executive session.
Thank you. And I'd state for
Thank you,
the
sir.
record that the discussion in executive session will constitute attorney-client communications for which no further recording needs to be made. The first item.
On with the public session. Mr. Counselor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to the board. During this morning's executive session discussion, the board discussed with council the items listed on agenda tab 3 and received communications from council regarding those items. I would note for the record that Director Jacober was not present for the discussion of item 3A, and Director Dennison was not present for the discussion of item 3G. There were two potential, there are two items discussed for consideration of potential action. The first is with respect to the application of Climax molybdenum And on that, I would be willing to make a recommendation to the board if you would. So
Please.
with respect to that case, I would note that Climax has accepted the proposed changes to its proposed ruling and decree that were proposed by the River District, and requests that the board authorize staff and council to approve the stipulation in the application of Climax molybdenum, the case number is 12 CW 175, Water Division 5, to stipulate to the most recent proposed ruling and decree.
So we need a motion.
So moved, Director Chavez. Oh,
Chavez and second by Francie Jacober. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passed.
Thank you, Mr. Our board. And the second item for potential action with respect to the River District's conditional water rights for the Fraser Valley project, and I would turn to Bruce Walters for that discussion.
Thanks, Peter. As we advised the board, we do have a July 31st, 2026 deadline for filing a diligence application for the Fraser Valley project's conditional water rights. We would request and recommend that the board confirm its intent to maintain those conditional rights and direct staff and council to file a waterfront application together with Graham County and Middle Park CEMA Fund regional diligence for the conditional water rights associated with that.
So moved. Motion by Dennison, second. Rover. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed. Motion passed.
Thank you. That is all of the action items from discussion in executive session. I don't have any thing further to report to the board unless there are any questions about general counsel's public report.
Seeing none. I'd like to ask for any public comment. The action is taken.
Or on anything. No,
Or anything we've talked about.
Don't see anybody online raising their hand, nobody in the room.
All right. Let's move on to staff reports.
Great. I'm gonna just take a moment here to introduce the River District's newest employee, Michelle Scheidler, who's here. Would encourage the board to talk with Michelle, dinner, if she's able to make it, if you're able to. Michelle is a new accountant here, comes to us from Division 5, with a lot of resources. Is doing an excellent job. She's been here
I think it's been
4 weeks,
full
and
weeks.
we haven't scared her away yet.
Yeah.
So we really appreciate her being here. And just want to say, please feel free to get the membership.
Thank you.
She'll be the one hounding you if you're submitting expenses.
Better get to know.
Nice to meet everybody.
Want to turn to the staff report and ask Amy and Raquel and Stephen to come on up. We're gonna talk about first item on there is the Colorado River Interstate and Intrastate update. Want to just I think we cover a lot in the memo and we're gonna cover everything, but I would say that, we're awaiting the final environmental impact statement on the 7-state discussion or lack of agreement. So therefore, a final environmental impact statement from the Bureau of Reclamation, the Department of So in this state, that would be Blue Mesa. As I think many of you are aware, the state of Colorado and Colorado Water Conservation Board last week publicly discussed the fact that the federal government is awarding $100 million to the Upper Colorado River Commission to create a contribution program or a conservation program. That contribution program is defined bigger than just conserved consumptive use. It is intended to encompass any kind of action that water users or a state takes that provides water into these reservoirs that would not be there but for the action. Most of that water is likely to come from some form of conserved consumptive use program. Call it demand management, call it system conservation, call it water bank, whatever you want to call it, a strategic water reserve. The idea is to, in large part, and that's what this $100 million grant from the reclamation to the Upper Colorado River Commission is intended to do, which is pay water users to forego the consumption of water, so that water, at least theoretically, ends up in these reservoirs and helps bring the system to some form of balance. It's the way it was announced at the Colorado Water Conservation Board meeting. It is a short-term Band-Aid. It is more of the same kind of short-term fixes on the river, paying primarily agricultural water users to forego the use of their water to help bring water into the system that is incredibly water short. It's not in and of itself a bad idea. This board has spent a long time, almost a decade, if not more, talking about how a program like that might work, where our interests on the West Slope lie in a program like that. And the board staff have a huge body of work that we've outlined previously. It's actually posted on our website. And I think the most recent is a list of principles that we have that are what we would like to see out of a program like this. And let me say, first of all, not a big fan of the idea of paying our water users not to use their water in order to bring it to provide it to a federal reservoir. It is hard to see that happen because it creates economic uncertainty. It may frankly foster an environment in which speculators from Wall Street and other places desire to buy agricultural land and water in Western Colorado merely for the sake of profiting. So it is hard to see a program like this set up. On the other hand, the hydrology is clearly really severe and very problematic. Both Powell and Meade are in crisis. If you look at the 24-month study that was issued most recently, even with the emergency actions that have been taken by reclamation this year with respect to reducing the releases out of Powell or the Glen Canyon Dam down to 6 million acre feet and adding another 1 million acre feet from Plenty Gorge, by February of next year, it is anticipated that the Glen Canyon Dam will hit the 3490 or lose the ability to produce power. It's a significant crisis on the river. And so being part of the solution makes sense. Having our state participate in this makes sense. How we participate and frankly, how the lower basin and others participate is really important. We have long advocated for an intelligent water conservation program that is structured in such a way that provides some certainty to our water users, protects the West Slope from becoming the sacrifice zone under a state water conservation program, that makes sure that all sectors and geographies that rely upon Colorado River water use actually participate in a conservation program. Why are we concerned about this? the long-term economic consequences to our agricultural economy, to our communities that depend upon it are really severe. And if you look at earlier pilot programs, like the System Conservation Pilot Program, all of the water in that most recent 2-year program came off the west slope. And from our perspective, that is a failure by the Upper Colorado River Commission and the state of Colorado that administered that program. The idea that only agriculture on the west slope is supposed to balance the river, or agriculture in general from the upper basin is supposed to balance the river, ignores a tremendous amount of other water uses and geographies that use water. And it concentrates the potential target zone for investors from out of state. It also concentrates the potential economic harm in the western slope. Our work on this has shown that we think you can have an intelligent marketplace. We've invested a lot of time and effort to do that. We have suggested a lot of ideas behind it. We are concerned that the state is now once again put in a position of having this $100 million show up. Our state is likely to argue or receive, somewhere around 50% of that money. That's $50 million over 2 years. It's a much larger scale program than we've seen in recent years in water conservation. The scale is potentially harmful. While this program is being pitched as a temporary deal, it will set precedent, and the concerns we have are significant. The Colorado Water Conservation Board talked about this last week at their meeting. They also indicated that they intend to make decisions as to how this program will operate at their next meeting, which is in September. And they have invited comment and participation in their public process, and we appreciate that and think that that's important. I want to maybe turn it over to Amy, Raquel, and Stephen, who've done quite a bit of work on these issues, to kind of walk through some of the comments we believe we will submit. Where the staff is going to work on that. We're going to need to submit these comments before this board has another quarterly meeting. So we will draft them, we'll circulate them among board members before we send them in and get your comments. But we won't have another chance to have a board discussion like we would like to have today. I'm going to first turn it over to Amy because I'm sure I've left things out, and Amy is likely to know what I left out. So.
No, thanks, Andy. I think, like Andy mentioned, we have a long body of work and history in exploring conserved consumptive use, both on its impacts and how a program could be done in a more thoughtful and intelligent manner. So we wanted to just put some of our conserved consumptive use principles that we've talked with the board over the last 6 months. These draft principles have evolved, and we expect them to continue to evolve as we learn and work with water users. But just, at the outset, these principles reiterate that while we support creative options for our water users to conserve water, we need to look at programs that can be thoughtful and intelligent and maintain the economic productivity of West Slope agriculture. We've also long believed that we need General Assembly and statutory authority to put rules in place and these sideboards that protect our communities with programs like that. So our principles reiterate that theme, that we believe a conserved consumptive use program needs to be done through legislation enacted by the Colorado General Assembly. So you've seen these principles before, so I'll go over them, just a high level and really just the main themes that a program needs to protect Colorado's interest and maintain the program's integrity. One of the flags that we'll likely talk about or recommend that we talk about in our letter is the CWCB, referred to this contribution program as taking some of the core concept of the provisional accounting MOU, but also adding this credit mechanism that the upper division states will get credit for any water used, but that would come through a separate agreement. So Andy mentioned that this 100 million is Inflation Reduction Act dollars that needs to be obligated by September 30th. And so the Bureau of Reclamation and the UCRC are working towards that. But we expect that there needs to be subsequent agreements as to how are these accounting methodologies going to work and how are the upper division states going to get credit. So we do have, one of the concerns that we would recommend we talk about in our letter is moving forward with a program that would launch in the fall of 2027 into 2028, potentially without those credit mechanisms fully established.
You meant 2020, would launch in the fall
In
of
the fall of
2026
and
for
2027,
irrigation
yeah.
season 2027. Right.
Yep, thank you. We also have long talked about that contributions need to be from all sectors and all water users that consume Colorado River water. And so, you have seen many slides that all of the SCPP participants in 2023 and 2024 were exclusively West Slope participants. And that's not sustainable in a long-term program. And it's not sustainable even looking at this contribution program that's been talked about as a stepping stone or a bridge building program. One of the mechanisms that we've long explored is the importance of variable pricing in ensuring that we can truly incentivize participation from all geographies of our state that uses the Colorado River. We've also looked at numerous protections to avoid community level impacts. One of the areas with conserved consumptive use is there are a lot of unknowns of these tipping points of, we're talking about these programs that are scaling up. $100 million is more money on the table than was expended in the 2 most recent years of SCPP. How do we look at these protections and key into avoiding these tipping points that we don't remove an amount of agriculture that has permanent negative impacts that we can't come back from. And so these principles include pieces that, we don't want to injure water rights. We want to be very cautious as we're using our state revenues or resources. We don't want these, we want to figure out how to protect communities and our ecosystems, and we need to maintain trust and transparency. I think one of the strongest lessons learned from the most recent rounds of SCPP is this question of local involvement. And so when we turn to CWCV's high-level draft criteria that they presented to their board, one of the key pieces that we think is missing is what is this element of local involvement? Peter did a nice job providing public comment last Wednesday in front of CWCV's board. And a theme that we may consider in our letter is, we have continued to string along temporary or 2-year program after 2-year program. And there are elements of these programs that we need to confront, like figuring out what does local involvement mean, and like working with our General Assembly to put these protections in place, many of which that we believe should be statutory. I want to kind of pause there before we get into kind of the other themes of our letter for, Raquel, if you have anything to add on our principles, or Andy, as we get into a few of the other components.
Yeah, I think, one of the things we're seeing again, I think is an unfortunate cycle where the federal government provides funding kind of in my mind, the last minute, right? I mean, one of our elements of our principles is it should set up, if it's going to work, it should be a long-term funding stream that allows for people to have, again, some certainty and some understanding how the program's going to work. Allowing for lessons learned to improve the program as it moves through its lifespan, but to have funding, at this late date, a contract signed between the UCRC and the feds sometime in September. Many of our farmers in particular, but our producers are already planning for the next season in September and October for the next year. If you're just signing a contract and you don't have a program set up, you don't have sideboard set up, You don't have limitations in terms of acreage and number of participants in any ditch company or region, subbasin. If you don't have the right guidelines set up, what's gonna happen to any particular region or particular water project? And what are the consequences of, say, a disproportionate number of water users in one valley taking up the opportunity to fallow their lands? What does that do to the Main Street businesses and to the communities and others that depend upon that area? What does it do to the long-term viability of agriculture, right? None of that has been thought through and is being rolled out and considered that we see. So we're going to be asking the CWCB to do that, but it's hard for them to do it because this funding is only a 2-year funding stint. And it's being awarded, in my mind, at the last minute in September. It will take a while for any organization like the CWCB to put a program together. So when does the contracting opportunity show up for our producers? How do you know that you can participate? Those are really important issues that I think the certainty is important. I also I think Amy's going to get to this point in their in the state's process, but the idea that they can do this under existing authorities, right? So one of the key points on this has been, is there authority in the state to shepherd water to the state line for out-of-state purposes? Our district and others, many others, have taken the position that in the Colorado River, there is not that authority under statute today. If the state agrees with that, which has not been publicly stated one way or the other, how do they run a program like this and who's eligible to participate? And I think staff's going to get into that and just show some of the just preliminary analysis of what that means for availability of people to participate and on the converse, the impacts to those regions that can easily participate. Because for those areas that can participate, the impact may be concentrated and may be outsized. So I'll turn it back to Amy, but those are some areas that I think we need to talk about.
Yeah, I think, as we look at these draft criteria, there are many that, these are high level. There's not a lot of detail behind all of these criteria that the CWCB presented. One of the ones that we are really wrestling with, like Andy said, is the operating within existing authorities. And so operating this program without going through the legislature, without the shepherding authorization, can come into conflict with other elements of this criteria that we agree with and, as it's written, but when you look at encouraging contributions across the state and sectors, incentivizing proportional participation, without shepherding legislation, there are some questions and elements that we've dug into as to how can you still allow for participation across the state, if there's some incongruent pieces of how are you going to get the water and maintain the true intent of how does this help us from an interstate perspective. So I think, it would be a good time to turn to Raquel and Stephen to walk through, just within our district and thinking through, what would the likelihood of participation be in, a context of passive shepherding or without shepherding legislation.
Yeah, I think, and so this is kind of high level looking at different basins around our district under this lens of passive shepherding. Because the water under this program is no longer just system conservation water. You're going to have to track this water and get it into a crisp reservoir or make sure that it does actually flow downstream to Lake Powell for you to get credit for this. And so kind of looking at this, the green areas are colored as kind of the prime areas or the easy places where you could implement a passive shepherding conservation program. A lot of these areas are near the state line, so it's easy for the water to get across the state line, and because it'll be below any senior call. Or in the case of like the Grand Valley, it is the location of the senior call. Other places colored green are areas where they have adequate access to storage for some of this irrigation water. So the concept there is, you can hold that water back in storage and release it at a low demand time of year. So trying to release water during the winter time when it's less likely to get diverted by irrigation interests. Then the second color, kind of the possible, is the yellows. And so these are kind of these basins where you have other questions as to this passive shepherding and how will that actually work. So kind of looking at like the Upper Gunnison is the example here. There's calls on portions of those tributaries throughout the summer that if you were participating above the location of the call, you're likely that your water that is being conserved, that is not actively being shepherded, will just get picked up by the downstream call and won't be credited. So I think questions remain whether the state would, would they shepherd it around one person's head gate, or how, or would you truly just be forced to only participate if you're below the senior call on your tributary or on the stream, and you're able to get that water into Blue Mesa to be released at a later time, or to be held in account in Blue Mesa. And then kind of these orange colored basins are areas where, there's storage, there's potential for exchange into reservoirs. But I think the mechanisms there are a lot more complex and we just don't have a great understanding of how the state would intend or what administrative tools they would utilize to try and conserve and shepherd this water passively. And then the red is just really there's no storage in that area of the basin, and you're likely above a senior call, and any water you conserve during the irrigation season is likely just going to get picked up by the downstream user. And so probably improbable is kind of what we're coding those as being able to participate in a program like this.
A couple of things.
There's a question.
I just have a question. Have you thought about the seasonality, like the areas that are coded red can certainly be delivered before there's a call on the system because everybody's presumably being satisfied.
Yeah.
So they're not as improbable. They're improbable now.
I think that's a great point. I think looking here, this is kind of looking at that max ability to conserve water. So like a full irrigation season conservation program. I do think that the point of you could, under passive shepherding, run a conservation program April, May, maybe the beginning of June for a field, and that water would make it downstream during free river conditions. And I think that likely codes every single one of these basins as green under that program. I think just looking at this map, this is kind of looking at the ability to participate in a large, maybe more meaningful conservation program.
And I would say the complexities of figuring out partial season irrigation for how many months before a call. How does the state set a program up like that between now and the time period in which they contract, which hopefully is sooner rather than later, during 2026 at the latest, or January of 27. How do they figure out how many months you're, say somebody in your valley, Tom, that wants to participate in this, figuring out exactly what that might look like, and then whether or not there is a call during that time, or whether or not the water is physically available during that time. Who takes the risk? Is it the producer? That if the water turns out not to be there, either legally or physically, does the producer just not get paid? Or does the UCRC pay for water they don't get? And lots of real interesting questions in what is a very complex system, as you know.
No, it is there's lots of complexities. I only said that from the standpoint of, we're talking about putting water in a reservoir, in Lake Powell, maybe. When do you fill a reservoir? You fill it in May and June, when you have the most flow. And so that's all I was getting at, is you don't try to fill a reservoir in August.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, good point.
So when you're talking about these areas, some being more likely to be able to use this program, are we talking about just passing the water on? Or are we talking about storing it?
I think it's a combination, some of these basins do have storage related to the agricultural rights where, you could hold that water, but I think it's not like it's going to be held in Rudai as an account for Lake Powell. It'll be, if somebody is able to store water in Rudai, that would then be released in the wintertime when demands are low to then get that water into Powell, into this conservation account that we're hoping that there would be an agreement with. And I think this map more, instead of being more literal, like this is exactly who could participate, who can't, I think it's more intended to show kind of this disproportionate impact due to the lack of mechanisms at the state's disposal under the existing mechanisms that they hold.
And I think what it shows is the potential for the disparate impacts, right? And that because it's so easy to pay someone in the Grand Valley for a full season, that's going to be the inclination, right? That's the easy thing. And so if all the money is focused, say, in the Grand Valley and in the Uncompahgre Valley, what's the impacts to those communities? And conversely, we have to recognize that this tool set up right can be a tool to help families who are, who are producers through times where they need the money to either improve their system or pay off debt or put a kid through college. That tool may not be available to them, right? Because of the lack of structure, the lack of forethought and planning. So that's where, I mean, it's kind of on both sides of the issue. It's the lack of opportunity, but it's also the too much opportunity, if you will.
Jerry Ginnison,
Thank you, Director, President Callen. And to follow up what Andy just said, I think it's important to realize that as you change authorities, you open it up perhaps to a wider and broader realm of possibilities across the basin and include more benefits, which I think is what we should be thinking about this is, yeah, you could certainly direct all of these programs to the lower Grand Valley, parts of the Uncompahgre without water hits the Colorado is going to make it to Powell. But expanding it to either shepherding programs and get it by other downstream diverters or store it in a variety of reservoirs upstream and then release it at a time when we know it's not going to be used for additional consumptive use. Expands the benefits to the entirety of the basin. And it's hard not to look at a year like this where we would do anything for more storage and more flows in almost every single tributary we have right now and later in this year, and not think that any kind of plan or any kind of structure that we could put on a program to put more water in storage seems like money and time well spent. So it's not just that we're limiting to certain areas, but we need to expand the benefits. And for a long time, I think many of us in the state have been advocating for that thinking so that we can put that water in storage and control it ourselves, not just send it downstream and hope for the best.
I think, but emphasizing the subtle nuances and differences in each one of these communities, in these rural communities. I don't want to release that water in the winter time.
Yeah.
I want to release it when those record of decision flows are going out of Blue Mesa because that's when we're most guaranteed probably to get it there. The other thing is, following a year like this year, how many of producers in my basin are going to want to participate? We can't fallow our fields and we've already denied them a lot of water today, and you're going to do it a second time in there. You're not going to make it past year two. You're not going to. So it is throwing money at something without a lot of thought. And I think I feel like we are on repeat. Someone brought it up earlier that we keep doing this since 2018 or 2017 when we first started these programs. And we've emphasized all along to the state of Colorado that we need to get these conversations going. We need to put some thought into these programs. We need to have some local control and say in these programs and how they're done. And emphasizing again that the one size fits all is not going to work. It is not going to work. And we're not going to get any further in Colorado with helping with this problem. Again, how do you measure conserved consumptive use? Irrigators in my valley are not gonna wanna fallow. They're probably gonna wanna deficit irrigate or split season irrigate or something like that. How are we gonna measure that? And how are we gonna account for it, especially without any authorization to shepherd? So, and I think today, a lot of our communities and our water conservancy districts have not been consulted by the state of Colorado when these programs are going through.
Right.
And I think we could have been very helpful in minimizing some of those impacts or bringing to light some of the issues that we've seen, such as the Grand Valley and the Cameo.
And Director Chavez, is it okay if I go?
Yeah.
In response to that, I think you raise some really good points, and I think there's the desire from staff level to support the state and support being part of a solution. We've often advocated for that on the Bigger River. So we want to be somewhat supportive and understand that there's no way today that we could set up a structure legislatively before this program rolls out for the 27 year irrigation season. So I wonder if there's a solution in there somewhere where we provide our comments, but among the comments we provide are that the CWCB do their best to avoid disproportionate impacts during this next irrigation season. But they agree to ask the General Assembly to set up the parameters and give the authorizations that are needed to run a better, more stable program, not just in the 28, but our experience seems to be that we're going to see these programs continue, not with this current financial authorization, but other financial authorization that's likely to come. Why don't we try to encourage that kind of programmatic approach? And I think it would allow for broader stakeholder involvement in the legislative process. It would enable us to provide our voices. Mark and his colleagues will have an awful lot of work at the legislature to come up with some sensible solutions. But it's truly something that we have been advocating for in terms of a broad stakeholder approach that hasn't occurred at the administrative level. Can we get it to occur at the General Assembly level? Does the board think that that's a good idea, bad idea? Is that, that's my question. There's some danger involved in that. So no offense, Mark, but
I know I had out.
I withdraw, I want to make a comment. So Andy kind of covered it. Thanks.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I think it's really important to have stakeholder involvement. For instance, here in the Roaring Fork Valley, it would be unusual to see it dried up because a lot of the farmers here don't need the money and they care more about the stewardship of the land than they do about the income from some kind of compensation program. However, like going into Uray, all those pastures, all that kind of place that provide habitat for wildlife, provide wetlands. And if we let those places fallow, we're changing not just that farmer's life, we're changing the life of the wildlife in the area. And as well as, it's a lot different for people to come and visit our rural communities when they're green. And so we have tourists who come and boost our economies, but if it's dried up, it has that impact as well. So I think having the decisions at the stakeholder level is really important because maybe there are some places where it wouldn't be quite so much impact to wildlife or local economies as other places. And just to have this kind of program put down on people from just the legislature without public comment or from the state without the legislature could be, I think, really harmful on all kinds of levels.
Reby?
So if you're shepherding the water, how are your downstream users not harmed?
If you are shepherding the water, if you're not shepherding the water,
if you are shepherding the water downstream, how are the irrigators below you not being harmed?
So the current way that the CWCB is proposing this is our understanding, but I think there's a lot of question on what is meant by operating under their existing authorities. We potentially interpret this that there would be no shepherding. So for you to participate in a program like this, or you would be participating under free river conditions where you don't need to shepherd, or you would be storing it at some reservoir temporarily and releasing it at a time where shepherding wouldn't be needed. I think part of our argument is that if you don't shepherd, you limit participation geographically. And if you did shepherd, let's say I'm a water user upstream of a river, a stream, and if I'm fallowing, my water is flowing downstream, a junior water user downstream could pick up that water, and that junior water user would be benefiting from me fallowing, but the program itself wouldn't be benefiting because the water that would be conserved by someone would not make it to Powell or some other reservoir, be stored there, get credit for it, and be used for the benefit of the upper basin. And so I don't know, does that?
If I think that's a good start. I think, Director Hazard, so what would be shepherded, and this is part of the complexity of a program like this, isn't the direct flow of the water right. It's that portion of the water right that would have been consumed had it been applied to that water user's fields. So there's a computation that would need to take place. And then there's a portion of that water that would then be shepherded. The consumed part would be shepherded past the other gates, the other head gates. Now, there are issues in computing return flow, the timing of return flow and the impacts that would have on neighbors. It would create a hugely complex situation. And so your question was, how would that not injure the downstream user? Well, it would require a whole lot more administration than we have today in the state of Colorado on our rivers, to such an extent that I don't know that it would physically and legally be possible, right? That's but without shepherding, you end up with that potential that there are certain areas that are targeted and can produce water in this program, and other areas that cannot. And therefore you end up with these disproportionate impacts that we've been concerned about. But
so I understand what you're saying, and on paper, I mean, it all looks good, but if Mark is not irrigating his and he's shepherding it down the creek and he's across the fence from me, I don't have the benefit of using his sponge or his return flows. And so that's where I see the harm, and it doesn't only affect me, but it affects the person below me. And
I would agree completely.
So I like the way this is going. The complexities are so location specific that I think it's impossible. So when we say, how are we going to do it then? Maybe we don't shepherd and we just recognize that there's not perfect equity among locations. And so there are going to be some who can participate easier than others. So the proportionality piece, we just have to require proportionality, and those who are not in a position have their water shepherded can participate, but just at a different time of year or a different way, just to meet the proportionality requirements. So the opportunity is somewhat equal, and the impact is somewhat equal around the western slope.
Well, what also indicate there's a whole lot of complexity in our desire to have not just the West Slope participate.
Well,
right.
Yeah.
So
Fair enough.
Yeah,
I should say that.
So, and maybe with the Trans Mountain diverters, there are ways they could participate if they were willing and able under our laws to reoperate their reservoirs in a way that would create the capacity to store it and release it at either the peak or during the winter.
Yep.
But there's a whole lot of question as to whether that would be possible legally and physically as well.
Alden?
Thank you. I thought about it a little bit more and I got something I want to add, if I may, please. Listening to everybody talk about the complexities for communities and how it, it's almost impossible, but, we're losing Rio Blanco County and Moffett County. We're all tier one, just transition communities too. And guess what we're being told to do is develop your agriculture, develop your recreation. So you got to put more water on the ground. And now they're saying, well, we want to take it. And by the way, we're going to put you in a high probability community to where we may come in and take your water too. So what's left? Where is that in the matrix as well? Because Montrose County is part of that. I think Routt County is part of that a little bit too. I'm sure there's other counties that I'm obviously missing here, but that was a state initiative that was passed via a House and Senate bill, signed in. So we're being mandated to make that change. And now we got a potential new one coming to us as well here. What are they leaving us? I really don't understand what they're leaving us to do. If now that's another checkbox that we may have to go against before we develop that 40 acres on that ground and want to put, 10 acre feet of water to it.
I'd like to say something quick. Seems to me like this first go around, it's all gonna be plowed ground. Not pasture land, not anything like that. It's gonna be plowed ground. Because the guy that owns that farm can decide whether or not he's gonna irrigate that year or not. The guys in the ranch country, they can't make that decision this year. They just simply can't. So it looks to me like target is on Uncompahgre and Grand Valley. It's where it would be probably the easiest to put it, maybe the highest offer from the feds in regards to how much they'll pay per acre. The other thing that we are talking about right here is conserved water. These guys come in and talk about dollars per acre. $500 an acre to not farm. Not so much about water, but it's about not farming the ground. And where I'm living right now, well, just right where my place is, I sent my water to my dad's place so they could make a crop. My ground's empty. And I don't want to do this again. It blows my mind to look out the window and there's just dirt. It's good soil, but when it has nothing in it, it's just dirt. And, I wasn't paid in order to do that. It was just one of the things you have to do when you're in the farm business. I think you're going to see some people because it's very, very tough in my country right now. This guy's only farmed half of their place because we only knew we were going to have half of the water when we started the spring. So the decisions were made. We'll only farm the best ground, first decision. Secondly, maybe we'll only farm half of this field. I see this program copying this probably more than any other program we've had. Particularly if the state is in there saying, well, we'll store it in the reservoir and then we'll let it go by Thanksgiving Day. They could make it very attractive to people that are having a heck of a time after having farmed just half of their farm this year to look at what they're going to do next year and think maybe what I ought to do is take the $200 or $400 per acre to not farm and let it lay idle and see what happens the next year. It depends on whether they're 2-year contracts or 1-year contracts. But I think it's, we've talked about a number of times, the perfect storm, short water year, short money year, and looking at another short water year. Because some of the banks may have something to say about it too. Because operating loans come up pretty quick. If you couldn't perform on that operating loan this year, if they're looking at the newspaper and seeing $300 or $400 an acre to not farm, they may call you in and say, you ought to take a look at some of those programs. So I think we better have our facts and, our letter saying some of those kind of things. so that the state, you know, we've said this before in this room. If you've never run a shovel, you probably don't know what water will do or won't do. Because on the paper and on that computer, it says, this is what the river should do. The river's never done what it said it was supposed to do. Depends on soil moisture, on ambient temperatures, all these kind of things. So you make the best decision you can at the time. But this is hurrying these guys to the point that some of them are probably going to look at the potential and say, you know, I didn't farm half of it this year. Maybe I won't farm half of it next year and take the money. So, you know, I'm afraid the program could get out in front of us so quickly, so far down the track, that if this is something we're pilot programming, it could get decisions already made for 2 years out rather than learning what we did this year, 27. Maybe that's one of the things we talk about in our letter is that let's look at the results after 27 to see what could be done to tailor make the program for Colorado. And I guess we don't have to make permanent rules. We may be able to make some temporary rules that people can try to live by and give the state an opportunity because, you know, they don't have enough equipment to shepherd. No way in hell you can go out there and stand at that creek and say, well, that's 2.5 CFS. Let her go by. That's not going to happen. Somebody be out there with a shovel banging on them too. So, you know, it's going to be one of those things, technology and all these things that we think we're going to get or they're coming are not here at a point where we can use them reliably to determine what's going to go past your head gate, my head gate, everybody else's head gate, and then measure the state line. And then expect Utah to keep their hands off of it. We're not just talking about farmers, I don't think. You know, I mean, everybody that runs water wants more water. That's the one thing that I know. But it just seems to me like those are going to be the real samples that say whether or not this could work. So, thank you.
I think just to summarize, you know, some of the key themes that we've identified and heard here that we'll formulate in the letter really rely on, you know, our principles and our long history on this topic. You know, I think first we will highlight some concerns with operating within existing authorities. You know, we're increasing the scope and scale of a program like this without a public process, without protections that could be afforded by state statute. And there could be a way to engage with the state as they, you know, potentially recruit for a program in 2027, but call on, you know, the state to partner with the Colorado General Assembly during the 2027 legislative session to really dig into these issues in a more transparent and publicly available way to confront a lot of the themes that we've heard of, you know, we do need to recognize what does local involvement mean and the intricacies of each sub-region. And that, you know, these complexities are really site specific. So those are things that we plan to highlight in our letter. I think we will highlight, you know, a lot of the mapping work that Stephen has done, along with Raquel, of just recognizing that there may be an imbalance of participation. And that's something that we need to wrestle with to ensure that, you know, we are keeping an eye on protecting communities and not running into long-term impacts. We also want to highlight that these companion agreements that recognize the Upper Basin getting credit and recognize these accounting methodologies are important. And it's important that we are transparent and we understand how that's going to operate. We also need to look at protections against speculative interests and need a lot more feedback and detail on a number of these criteria that you see listed here that, you know, it's hard for us to assess. You know, what do you mean by minimum acreage for irrigation projects? What is that? You know, that potentially could be something we agree with, but we need more detail in a lot of these concepts to fully analyze. So again, this was just released last Wednesday. We have a big foundation to lean on, but wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity for board feedback on some of the direction and pieces that we proposed.
And can I ask a quick question right here? So like with the minimum acreage for irrigation, it seemed like it should be limited water for production. I mean, if people change their crops and use less water, does that count? Or is it only everything goes by the head gate?
So the way the program works or has worked in the past is conservation of consumptive use. So you could do that by fallowing your field the whole season or part of the season. You could also do that by crop switching and consuming less water in your field throughout the irrigation season.
The one thing we haven't really touched on is one of the items the district has talked about in the past relates to, I think it's number 12 up there. The way they have it phrased, I think, and these are direct, correct me if I'm wrong, Amy, direct quotes from CWCB presentation last week. Encourage contributions from across the state and sectors, including considering ways to incentivize proportional participation. So what we've said previously is have a variable pricing mechanism in the market so that regionally you can pay more for areas where water has a higher value. Just, if you look in northeastern Colorado, Colorado River water shares out of CBT go for more than they do in the southwest part of our state. It may on one hand seem unfair if they get paid more on the northeast corner of our state than on the southwest corner. On the other hand, it's a reflection of the value of water brought to that location. And it would actually incentivize and potentially, we would think, and in the past we have said, set targets, set quotas that you want from different basins so that you're producing the right amount of water to the program. Is that still something the board would like us to speak to and provide comment on a staff level?
I don't disagree with that, but the problem is that water molecule that's going to PAL doesn't know the difference between the north east corner or the southwest corner.
No, it's the same water molecule potentially, right? But for instance, the last time they ran this system conservation pilot program, they had the upper basin pilot program, and they set pricing in the state of Colorado at 509 an acre foot. But they set pricing in IID at $800+ an acre foot. Same drop of water, same molecule of water. They're getting paid $300 more an acre foot than a farmer up in western Colorado. They've already recognized that there's a variable pricing mechanism within the basin. There is also the reality that water is worth more in our state in certain locations. If we want this program to avoid disproportionate impacts and have participation statewide, other than variable pricing, I'm not aware of a way to do that. That's.
Mark?
I would think you'd have to have the variable pricing. I mean, it's true. It's not going to be total equity, but to get participation where it isn't just targeted at farm ground, isn't just targeted in the main place. You have to.
Yeah.
So I agree with what you're saying there.
Scott?
So I just want a little follow-up on what's reasonable, perceivable, negative. So if you take Grand Junction, so Montrose down. If you have much success down there, you're gonna put the John Deere dealerships. I think the #1 vehicle sold in both counties are pickup trucks. I mean, it's gonna have a lot of impact on the community. In addition to that, the Grand Junction's growth, these irrigation companies that were built down there were all of like 1800s, 1900s. Well, it's like with U Water. U Water was developed just to service the farmers and the ranchers. But the city grew up. So water, most people think the city of Grand Junction provides the domestic water. We're not talking domestic here, but just an example. And water probably, I guess, probably serves 70% of the people in the city of Grand Junction. Used to be farms. And so here you have a lot of use of agricultural rights. And they're allowed under their right to do it for residential tendency. So one, how do you define agriculture? And then two, how are we going to help the community? I mean, it would have if you had a lot of success of following ground in Mason County, which would have condemnations, the same problem. If they come, I mean, it'd have a very negative impact on our community. But is there any door for the community or people to come in and say, I don't know how to do that.
Well, I wonder, Scott, on that. I mean, previously, the way this board addressed that is to limit a percentage in any one sub-basin. So in the Grand Valley, say no more than 15 or no more than 20% of the irrigated acreage could participate total. And maybe you do that by the major ditch companies. But you limit the amount that can be fallowed, and therefore you limit that aggregate economic impact to the greater community.
That makes sense. Now, can you get enough water doing that, or do you have to, if you're gonna fish, you gotta go where the fish are. And
Right.
you look at Mason agriculture, if you wanna look at cattle, you go to the east side of the state. I mean,
I hear what you're saying, and it's kind of a two sides of the same coin, right? Like you gotta, but if you want to avoid those, and this is remember the state's list of things they want to do, and I think we support avoiding those negative community impacts. The way we've addressed that previously is primarily through a limitation on a percentage of the area that can be fallowed. Because if you fallowed, for instance, if you had no limitation and say, 60% of Rio Blanco County decided to participate in the White River. What do you think that would do to Meeker and Rangeley? I mean, that would just destroy their local economy, right? And so how do you make sure that doesn't happen?
and then the process of the drawing, who gets to do it?
Right.
I mean, just wanna think
All
all
right.
that out.
I hear you.
All right, thank you.
Andy, I was just thinking, I've always viewed it as you don't do it by the acre. You do it by a percentage of the total consumptive use in a basin. And, it takes four acre foot to grow 4 crops of alfalfa. In the Grand Valley, takes 1 to grow the 1 cut of alfalfa I get up in Moffett County. So if you do it by the percentage of consumptive use in the basin, I don't think you draw out near as many acres then. And therefore, the John Deere dealership is not impacted as big.
Sonia?
And I don't want to forget about the recreational impacts too. The Upper Gunnison study, the ag return flow study is preliminarily showing that 80 to 89% of the water that we apply to the fields in that lower East River segment is returning back to the river system. If, for instance, any of that was concentrated in that area there, you would lose that return flow. And I think we see it in the rivers this year. As soon as the producers had to turn off and those return flows stopped, we saw it immediately. We saw a slight bump in the system and then you see the drop again. Our community is founded on the commercial boating and fishing industry, which supports our hotels and our restaurants and everything. Wells, in our monitoring of the wells in the ag return flow study, you can see when they start flooding those fields, an immediate response from those wells. The timing of when you do that, and if you can get that sussed up in the beginning, maybe you would eliminate some of the harm. So again, it's going to be so site specific, and maybe we try to learn more, do some pilot studies with this money in certain areas. And Jesse's project on trying to limit in Powderhorn Creek.
Right.
That's one where he worked really hard to get several participants in that area together so that they could actually do the conservation. One landowner didn't want to participate. And so how can you be successful and still save and have a benefit and have some control over that water and have it count for something and not have someone else pick it up?
Gary?
I think it's, I'm sorry.
No, you go.
I just want to point out that most of the projects that we've seen to date that were demand management or system conservation projects have not been fallowing. I think most of it has been split season irrigation. The ones I've been involved with have been replacement crops, growing small grains instead of alfalfa, split season irrigation practices. And a farmer in the North Fork, so we need to focus on how to do this, but make sure that we're growing something, just use less water. And that's really, I think, the direction that most of these projects have taken. And I think Jesse's project in the Powderhorn's a great example of, you know, I think it's irrigate up until July 1 or something like that, and then you stop irrigating. That at least provides some green, some green up, some flood irrigation, whatever happens on the ground. I just wanted to make that point, but it's not always fallowing.
I agree.
Yeah.
I'm wondering where golf courses fit into this, because they're very green all the time. And I hear it from my constituents all the time. Why do we have water restrictions in Aspen and the golf course is green? And around here, you can almost golf from Vail to Aspen without stopping. So that's a lot of water. And I'm wondering, where does that fit into this? Is there anything about golf courses?
There's not, I mean, I think because it's being pitched, and I think the district has been supportive of any program like this being voluntary. And the idea that the amount of money, I'm pretty sure you'd have to offer a golf course to not irrigate is much higher than the amount of money you would have to offer a farmer.
That is such a sad statement about our
It
society.
is a statement about the comparative
Value.
profitability of those operations.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've done some research on dry golf courses and they exist, and it's like, it's unbelievable to see the water going on them. I'm just saying, could we just have something about golf courses in this discussion and legislation?
Even those projects that provide longer term benefit versus the ones when you're done. Western Colorado University is modernizing their irrigation system. Doing it as a phased approach, putting in a mosquito system, putting in soil moisture sensors. I mean, those are ongoing benefits that you get too. So I agree. I don't think it should be just those things. I think we need to think more creatively.
Scott?
Well, you go to golf courses, you better go to snowmaking and a lot of different things.
Right.
Use a lot of water, and up there, snowmaking is pretty important.
I did hear though that 90% of the water from snowmaking goes back into the water.
Well, and if you look at the golf courses in Grand Junction, they have closed systems. One family owns 3 or 4, so they have closed systems. No, I don't have any golf course or anything, but I saw an interesting article this morning. So Aurora has encouraged people to cut back on their water dramatically, and they really. And you saw that the bottling, there's a company that bottles water, and they sell to Costco, and I mean, it's a big production. And they told Aurora, we're not doing it. We're not gonna do it.
Right.
And
Meaning they're not gonna cut back to me?
Right.
they're not, that's their business. They bottle water, they got permission to be there, and it's going to be interesting what some of this brings up.
Yeah, that's a 200,000 acre feet a year of water bottling is what I read, so.
Really?
Yeah. No, it can't be 200,000. It's gotta be 200,000 gallons.
It can't be 200,000.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's gallons, sorry, not acre feet. Did you, I think Gary had his hand
Just
up.
all plans, 100,000 factor.
I just, just a comment here, that in your letter, you might as well just put 8 and 9 are impossible.
Yeah. I agree.
Their goal there, is pie in the sky. There's gonna be injuries somewhere. Administrative views, there's no way this is gonna be a nightmare.
I don't dispute either of those points. Especially with respect to the injury, and therefore, if there is going to be likely injury, any program should provide for the opportunity to other water users to protest and address that injury. Otherwise, you're establishing a program that's, effectively designed to injure other water users.
Good point.
Well, maybe, did you want to add anything? I just wanted to add something on the payment conversation, because I think this can be an interesting point where previous SPP programs compensated water users by average consumptive use in the last 5 years before they participated in a program. Utah has their pilot demand management program, and the first year they compensated folks from estimated water conservation. And then they decided to modify that in year 2, and they actually this year, they're compensating people on actual water conservation. And so this year, the estimate was much higher than what it's actually gonna be. So what they've done, they paid half of it beginning of the season. And it could be that the second payment is close to 0 for some water users. And I don't know what payment is gonna be like in this future contribution program. So anyhow, I just wanted to flag that.
And that goes to who bears the risk, right? Is it the landowner who enrolls in the program who bears the risk that they may not get paid in full? Or is it the program that bears the risk that they won't get all the water that they're paying? Utah has decided that it should be the landowner.
Of course they have.
Right. My guess is that's where the state's gonna come out on this. There's logic on both sides of that. Can I wanna just back up a minute. Mark, this is relevant to the last time I saw you before this meeting. Mark was up on this very powerful dais at the General Assembly in a hearing room. And Mark and several of the legislators, in a bipartisan fashion, I might add, because we don't see a lot of bipartisanism anywhere these days, all had this question about conservation program. I think you said it was June 25th. They said that the legislator said, we would like you to come back to us before you set up any program. And it was very clear from the legislature that they wanted this because they feel that they represent the people whose communities are going to be impacted by these programs and whose livelihoods are going to be impacted by these programs. The people who are likely to be injured by someone upstream or downstream participating in the program. The communities that are going to lose the John Deere operator or the truck dealer. Is that something that this board wants us to do, which is to keep that program set up in that fashion? That we want, say, we know that the legislature can't act before the program runs in 2027. But should we ask the state to have the legislature at least investigate, if not legislate, the kind of a long-term programmatic conditions and terms to have these programs operate within our state? Because otherwise, this is one small agency in a state government that is making these decisions. It's the CWCB. The board is appointed by the governor, not elected by the people. There are 4 of them that come from the West Slope, but there are only 4 of them, right? So is there an opportunity here where we could get a broader discussion, that stakeholder discussion to occur at the legislature? And I know that I asked a variation of this, but trying to understand what the board would like us to do in terms of this letter. Remember, you can pretend that President Catlin here is not a senator. You can say whatever you want about him.
I guess I would have to say that I understand where you're coming from, and I think you're probably right. I don't have a lot of faith in the legislature, Mr. Catlin excluded, that I think that it should be done, if nothing else, to try for bigger stakeholder involvement. They are representatives. So I would agree that probably should be in the letter, as much as I don't know how much faith I have in the legislature.
too much of the time.
I pretty much agree with Mark. I categorize it though as having the legislature do it's the worst selection, there's worst option there is except for all the others.
Well, there's not really a right.
Thank you, Winston Churchill. You said that about democracy, right?
Yeah.
Well, anything else, Amy, Raquel, Stephen? Really appreciate it. Remember that map was very preliminary. The work, I really want to stress that that is not a conclusory piece of work by Stephen and Raquel, but he did a great job just trying to figure out where that might, what might happen. So I appreciate the effort there and thank you. All right, moving right along to the next item. The Shoshone, I think, you're aware that the legal case continues. We are, I guess I will just say I have full confidence in our legal team and our engineering team and our experts, consultants to prevail in that case. Trial's not scheduled until July of 2028. I think it is likely, and we should anticipate that we're going to trial. We're going to do everything we can to settle it between now and then, but we're not going to sell out the West Slope in order to get a settlement. And so we are preparing for and will be having trial in July of 2028, which means a year, 2 years from now, you may not have attorneys and or me present here because we might be in a courtroom across town because the trial will still be going on, but we'll figure out what to do about that when it gets closer. Always great, right? I will say we are working to close the gap. We have a $1.7 million funding gap right now. Amy and I and others have been involved in conversations with some of the additional local entities who have expressed interest, as well as renewing contacts with some that said they may have room in their budgets for additional contributions. We're very, I think I'm very optimistic that we will close that gap here in the next 6 months or so. And then the goal is to start getting those entities that have committed funds to start putting them into escrow so that we have the money available when we close. Anything else on that?
No, I think, well, we've been working with communities to make sure for those that haven't budgeted and appropriated, that they do so during their 2027 and 2028 budgets, just like Andy said. So we move that into our interest earning escrow account. But yes, the funding effort continues. We're up to 43 different local funders. We had an additional 5,000 contribution from the Grand River Ditch Company. And so we are still working with a number of local entities that are interested in contributing and being part of the coalition.
When would you start meeting to get the money into escrow? What date?
So our goal is to have it all into escrow by the end of 2028. Just like Andy mentioned, expecting the potential trial in mid of 2028. So we would need to have all of our purchase price complete by the time we have our change decree.
But I think given public budgeting, what we are recommending to our entities as we go back out to them is that they consider a two-tiered approach. So budgeting half in 2027, putting it into escrow, and the other half in 2028. So it's not a 1 year hit.
Those letters ought to go out now.
Well, we're working on that. Yeah, we understand. And so we're going to see what we can do on that here. Any other questions if there are no other questions on Shoshone, we'll turn to a really uplifting subject, the hydrology report. Sam, come on up. Gloom and doom, Sam. He's such a nice guy and he gets this like terrible stuff that he's got to cover. He does it with a big smile on his face.
Next year, it's gonna be different.
Yeah, there you go. I like your optimism. First question on hydrology before you start. At 6:00 p.m. when we start our picnic, will we be inside or will we be outside?
We'll be sheltering in storm for 5 minutes.
All right.
that?
All right, I think I'll kick it out to Raquel to get us started.
So we're gonna start with the Big River update. So just a reminder, if you need one, that snowpack peaked 1 month early at approximately half of median. And there is no snow left, at least in the Snowtail sites. So you can see what the median peak is, April 6th, 16 inches of SWE. We peaked 1 month-ish early on March 9th with less than 9 inches of snow water equivalent. So moving to what inflows are looking like for the major reservoirs in the system. These are numbers from the Bureau of Reclamation from June 3rd. You can see on this table that forecasted inflows for water year 2026 for all the major reservoirs dropped other than Powell. Actually, Powell's projected inflow for 2026 is now at 3.5 million acre feet. It has increased because of wetter conditions than they originally had in their forecast. But Lake Powell right now is sitting at around 3524 feet. So 5.5 million acre feet of storage. And if you remember, the drought response operations agreement from back in the day was trying to protect 3525 feet. We're below that, and we're gonna continue to be below that. Andy mentioned this a little bit earlier, that because of the dire conditions, there were 2 actions taken by the Bureau of Reclamation on water year 2026. So the drought response operations agreement, they're releasing from Flaming Gorge 660 to 1 million acre foot, but know that all of their modeling is using 1 million acre foot release out of Flaming Gorge. The timing of those releases, it started very end of April, but the DROA year goes until April of 2027. So that 1 million acre foot is not all going to go into Powell this calendar year or even water year. Part of it is in 2027. Go ahead.
Do you know in the recent months what that has resulted in increased flows or increased releases as per like what we would have been expecting out of Flaming Gorge?
I have a graphic on that I can pull up at some point. We can talk a little bit more. And so that is one of the actions, or one of the 2 actions. The second action was reducing release out of Powell from 7.5 million acre feet to 6. And those 2 actions still are not enough to keep Powell above minimum power pool under the minimum probable condition or projections. So under the probable minimum inflow, Lake Powell may still drop below minimum power pool this winter. And you can see that here on the graph. And as I mentioned, unregulated inflows 3.5. Just as comparison, 2002 water year inflow into Powell was 2.9 million acre feet. So we're seeing more water going into Powell this year compared to 2002. 2002 was drier than 2026, but 2026 was hotter, or the hottest year on record. I just wanted to flag that end of this calendar year, most probable projections have Powell at 3507. So just thinking about, right, we used to try to protect 3525. We're ending the calendar year at 3507. And that is pretty close to minimum power pool, which is why you see in February of 2027 in the red line, Powell falling below minimum power pool. These have impacts to Lake Mead, right? A lower release from Lake Powell results in less water going into Mead. And so we're seeing Mead hovering at 1035 feet. At this elevation, there's significant loss of power production, reduction in around 70% of power production of Lake Mead. And we then see in the spring of 2027, Lake Mead dropping below 1025 feet. And at that elevation, under the current guidelines, which they will be modified, ICS cannot be delivered from Mead when you hit that elevation.
And can I just make sure I'm on the same page? This chart assumes a 7 million acre foot release in 2027.
That is correct.
So
It could be worse.
right, it likely will be worse.
What is ICS?
Intentionally created surplus. So this is water that lower basin water users, some of them can save into Lake Mead and use it at a later date.
Okay, thank you.
So with that, I will turn it back to Steve.
All right, really good local news. So I always like to show this one now. This is the quadrant plot for the Colorado River drainage within the state. So this is the entire west slope. And this is on the vertical axis, average temperature for the water year. So going up is higher temperatures. And on the horizontal is accumulated precipitation for the water year. So going to the right is a wetter year. Want to highlight a couple of our sort of record dry years. They're kind of spread out here. 77, 02, and 2012 are all the 3 years we talk about most. And we are in 2026 way up here, not quite as dry, but significantly warmer than any of those years. So we're about 1.5 degrees warmer than our previous record set in 2018. We're now the 9th driest water year so far to date. That's down from 14th last time we met. So it's been getting drier. Just wanted to point out too, that's about 3 inches more than we had in 2002. And most of that came in early May. So kind of post, at least for this year, post snowpack accumulation season. I just wanted to point out kind of what that looked like. We looked at the snow plot. So just looking forward from that. So this is accumulated precipitation for the same time frame. And I just want to point out, you see 2026 hovering at the bottom, that minimum red line, which was set in 2002 for basically midwinter, early spring. And then we started to diverge from 2002 again in early May. But since then we've leveled off and are approaching that minimum line again. So just in time for the monsoons to finally be arriving. So hopefully it was doing it back up, closer to 2012 at least. So no surprise we've got widespread drought. So the entire upper Colorado River basin is currently in some form of drought. The west slope is mostly in D2 severe drought or D3 extreme. But the Colorado headwaters, kind of with the bullseye on Eagle County, are in D4 exceptional drought. This is pretty similar to this time in 2012. It's actually a little better than in 2002, which I suspect is because it's just a wetter year slightly than 2002. But there are a lot of factors that go into drought. Of course, it's much drier than 2002 was, so evaporative demand is quite a bit higher. It's not like we're seeing it out there. So just wanted to give a couple examples of stream flow. This is the light near Meeker. So we have our median peak flow close to 3,000 CFS in early June. Our lowest peak on record was from 1977 at just under 1,000 CFS. This year, we peaked, that should be May 27th. So pretty normal time frame, but down at 564 CFS. So extremely low. On the white, same thing at dot zero, typically peak close to 9,000 CFS early June. Our lowest peak on record was 2,000 CFS in 02. And this year was a remarkable 2 months early, more than 2 months early, even in late March at about 1,500 CFS. And while we're here, I just wanted to point out a couple things. Obviously, Shoshone, the senior water right there, sort of dictates the stream flow at Zero for most of the year. Typically, that's just in the winter that we're at that 1250, but you see this year, that's sort of the best we've reached. And You see a lot of fluctuation early this season. That was due to the 2007 Shoshone Call Relaxation Agreement being implemented. So that was March 18th through May 20th. And this saw the call relaxed to 704 CFS, so half of the total Shoshone rights at times, unless a cameo call was imminent and dictated higher releases to .0. Then the flows raised closer to 1250 and at times up to 1250. And I just wanted to point out the savings that different entities gained from the Shoshone Call relaxation operations. So it's a hit to Shoshone and made things tough on Cameo, where they had to they were reducing their demands for a significant portion of this time period because they started irrigating so early this year. We saw significant savings to the CBT, over 13,000 acre feet, significant savings to Denver Water, over 6,000 acre feet. We'll say the HEP, the historic feeder pool in Green Mountain, also managed to accrue some savings during this time. So including the substitution that's owed by Denver Water, that amounted to about 10,000 acre feet. So we did get some benefit out of the relaxation this year. And finally, just wanted to point out the Gunnison near Grand Junction, flow looks pretty similar down in that sort of bottom 10th percentile for much of the season. Typically peak around 10,000 CFS, and this year it peaked down at 20% CFS. And here too, I wanted to point out the low flows, the base flows, dictated by the Aspen unit targets. The dry year target is typically 750 CFS, and you see some of the other years I put on here, in 1977, 02, and 2012, they hovered somewhere around that 750 line. As with this year, June through some of the month of July to date, although the target was recently reduced, as was discussed earlier. And so you see that blue line for water year 2020 dipping just in the last week or so. All right, looking forward, these are our seasonal outlooks from NOAA. So these are for the August through October period. On the left is our temperature outlook, and you see, as usual, we're expecting above normal temperatures. I didn't see anything different. I can just want to give these illustrations. On the right, we are leaning slightly above normal polar precipitation chances. So for the same August through October period, these outlooks just published in July are a slight improvement on the outlooks published in June. So we're trending in the right direction, but they've bounced back and forth a little bit over the last 2 months. So it's hard to say, but it looks like we're at least heading towards a normal-ish monsoon, if not maybe slightly above average monsoon this year.
Doesn't seem very super-ish to me.
Not very super yet. We'll get there. So this kind of gets more into where the super maybe comes into play. So this is the November through January outlook. Temperatures are near normal for most of the state. Leaning slightly above normal. We're kind of on the cusp in the northern part of the state. But then the precipitation outlook again, this is also an improvement over last month's product for the same time period, showing leaning slightly stronger above normal for precipitation. So this is, where we may see those super El Nino impacts. As always, Colorado is sort of right in the middle of the influence range for El Nino and La Nina impacts. This suggests maybe they're expecting, El Nino impacts to reach up into Colorado this year. But of course, this could still change. So I wouldn't bank on it, but fingers crossed that this means a ton of snow from this winter. And now I want to look at our reservoirs on the west slope. So this map, each dot on this map represents one of our larger reservoirs. The percentage there is the percent of normal storage for that reservoir at this time of year. So I guess this is the end of June, slightly outdated, but this is the percent of the period record median for this time of year. And I put some of those onto a bar plot on the left, some of our kind of more critical reservoirs on the west slope. And you see we're mostly in sort of the 50 to 75% of normal range in terms of current storage. But then two of our biggest and most critical reservoirs, Green Mountain and Blue Mesa, are down in the 30 to 45% of normal. So just abysmally low for this time of year as we're drawing on those reservoirs heavily. And I'm going to turn it back to Raquel briefly to talk about Blue Mesa.
Thank you, Sam. So Blue Mesa Reservoir is at the lowest level it has been in history for this time of the year. And on this graphic here, you can see the black line is 2026. The blue line is 2021. We have 2002 there and 2022 as well. And 2022 was particularly low. There was a DROA release, 2021, 2022 that, contributed to these low levels. But I think what's interesting from this graph is 2022, you can see how reservoir elevations really increased that spring. You were sitting pretty low and then, things improved. And that's normally what you see with reservoirs is that they bump up in spring runoff. This year, similarly to 2002, there was really no bump. We've just been declining. And here you can see some important elevations for Blue Mesa. There's a winter target of 40 or 7490, which looks so high compared to where we currently are. There's the USGS study on harmful algal blooms show that below elevation 7470, that's when you see these blooms occur more often. And then at elevation 7450, there are more significant recreational impacts where rams have to be moved in Blue Mesa. So we are over 100,000 acre feet below the lowest we've been with Blue Mesa for this time of the year. And this year had the record low inflow to Blue Mesa below 2000, what it was in 2002. Record low storage. And yeah, so as you can see, this is pretty dire situation for Blue Mesa. We'll be talking a little bit more about this and a lot of the other slides in this presentation in terms of drought actions. We'll be talking about that in the next agenda item. So just still in Blue Mesa and looking at 24-month study projections for it. Blue Mesa is projected to drop below Power Pool this fall. You can see Power Pool is elevation 7393, so that would happen in October under minimum probable conditions. And it would get just above Dead Pool in the fall of 2027. And there's a lot of coordination happening right now on how to change operations of the Aspinall unit in Blue Mesa. So it's operated under the record of decision from 2012 and operated to keep flows at Whitewater Gauge near Grand Junction. In the summer, that target is 1,050 CFS. That target was dropped to 750 earlier this summer to try to preserve storage in Blue Mesa. And more recently, that target was dropped to 500 CFS. Flows through the Black Canyon. The base flow is 300 CFS. Right now it's at 250 and it will likely drop to 200. And there are a lot of conversations because these operations impact water users downstream. It impacts recreation. It has a lot of impacts, but having no water left in Blue Mesa is very impactful as well. So we are involved in a lot of these coordinations and having some hard conversations. I should reiterate that DROA operations are not happening with Blue Mesa Water this year. It's just Flaming Gorge. And I will, oh, actually, I pulled this graph up, Director Dennison. So this is Flaming Gorge DROA releases. So blue pieces of this bar is releases out of Flaming Gorge without DROA. The green bar is what has already been done. And then orange is their planned release. So you can see it's doubling the release out of Flaming Gorge starting in June, but the biggest monthly release was done in May of this year.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll turn it.
Wait 1 minute. What, I just thought about this. What kind of impact does that have on Flaming Gorge's recreation and like with ours, Blue Mesa? You know, you can't put your boat in now. Have you heard anything about Flaming Gorge?
I don't know a lot of the details. I will say that Flaming Gorge is in a much healthier state than Blue Mesa. Flaming Gorge has a capacity of close to 4 million acre feet. It was at close to 3 million acre feet. It's right now at around 2.5. So it's significantly better percentage wise than what Blue Mesa is.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so just I'm gonna cover a few more reservoirs. So looking at Green Mountain Reservoir, doesn't look that much different than Blue Mesa right now. So we had record low inflow this year, just about a third of normal. Currently at record low storage, just about a quarter full, which is pretty shocking. And have the second lowest projection for where we'll be come April 1st at the beginning of next year's fill. And I should note that's the lowest projection since 1963. But that year, that's when they drained the reservoir for maintenance. And so it's not really an apples to apples comparison. It's never been drawn down this far, had this low of an April projection based on normal operations. I should note that's also the drawdown that prompted the Heaney slide issues. We are not looking great this year. So talking about looking at the pools that filled in Green Mountain and sort of what the implications are for how low we are this year, starting with the HEP. So we filled to about 66% full. This is the first time, as we noted before, when we were expecting this, is the first time the HEP has failed to fill. Although it is much better than we were expecting last time we met, when we were expecting only about 10% of the HEP to fill. So we have done a lot better than that. With some spring precipitation, and again, the Shoshone call relaxation helped a bit with filling the HEP. I should note this 44 or so thousand acre feet that the HEP filled to this year. More than half of that is owed in substitution, so that's coming out of a little bit out of Dillon Reservoir, and then mostly out of Wolford and Williams Fork reservoirs. And the Grand Valley irrigators have been reducing their demands all season so far. They just reduced their demands to 1550 a couple days ago, relative to their 1950 that they can call for. So that's an effort to maintain the HEP for longer and also not call out upstream beneficiaries sooner than they absolutely have to. The silt pool, this is a 5,000 acre foot pool. This filled to about 3,300 acre feet this year, same percentage as the HEP. That's because this year the Bureau decided to fill these two pools pro rata in proportion to their capacities rather than filling the silt pool first, which is how operations normally occur. That was just in recognition of how little water there was to go around this year and wanted to get as much water into everyone's buckets as possible. The contract pool, I think as we've discussed, was completely unavailable this year. So this is 10,000 acre feet in contracts that Green Mountain serves. So this is one of the pools that we're meeting the shortfalls of with our drought mitigation releases that will be discussed in the next presentation. And then we already spoke about the Heaney slide quite a bit this morning, but we have seen those triggers. They began on the 15th, we had the most restrictive trigger on the fifteenth. So now Green Mountain's limited to only half a foot a day of drawdown. And so, as was mentioned, we're at about 167 CFS limit on releases from storage, which significantly hampers operations there because the HEP is demanding quite a bit more than that, a few hundred CFS. I'll add that the Bureau is increasing their monitoring. They normally monitor the HEMI slide twice a year. This year, once they hit the 7880 trigger, that triggered additional monitoring. So they're supposed to start monitoring monthly. We actually hit that trigger first in June, and they were going to schedule a survey, which they canceled. They're back above 7880 briefly. Of course, we're back below that and dropping fast. So there will be another survey sometime this month to see, how the slide's movement compares to our baseline rates. And yeah, just a note, this will be again discussed in the next presentation, but most of the River District's 2026 drought mitigation supplies are being used to meet Green Mountain Reservoir shortfalls. So that's the primarily the H&P and contract pools. Ruda Reservoir, similar situation, record low inflow, record low storage for this time of year, and again, record low projection for the beginning of fill next year, about 13,000 acre feet lower than the record. Despite that, the Bureau is planning to fulfill all contracts this year, so they will be drawing the reservoir down quite low. We have 2 of the 3 recovery program pools available for the endangered fish. So that's about 10,000 acre feet of about 15,000 acre feet. There's a 2,000 acre foot insurance pool in Ruda that we've discussed a bit before. This will all go to the Green Mountain Reservoir this year. So that will be another bucket that will help make up those H&P shortfalls. Most of the River District's drought mitigation supplies are actually coming from Ruda. So it's about 11,000 acre feet that we're using in Ruda from our contracts that we have. And Ruda is also, as are so many power producing reservoirs, projected to hit power pool this year. It's expected that Ruda to hit in August, which is earlier than anywhere else. This last occurred in September 2002. So it's been a while. And honestly, the last sort of worst year in recent memory that happened.
And one more thing on Ruda.
Yeah.
In terms of what Sonia asked about recreation, Forest Service told us at the above Ruda at the Thomasville caucus meeting recently that they're going to be closing the ramp soon. They're not sure exactly when, but that was a week ago. So there are a lot of boaters up there.
Well, yeah, I think they normally try to keep that alive through at least Labor Day. So
Oh, I don't know.
yeah,
Definitely didn't sound like that, which is.
not even close this year. Yeah. Moving on to the River District's assets. So Wolford is in equipment, but those other buckets, we had our second lowest inflow on record, just by 1,000 acre feet. So basically the lowest on record. We're at our record low storage for this time of year and dropping really fast. We've never released substitution this quickly. As mentioned earlier, we're releasing at greater rates than is decreed. So we're dropping reservoir down very quickly this year. And expecting our second deepest drawdown by the end of this irrigation season. So second only to 2002. And our releases this year, so again, as Andy mentioned, about 13,000 acre feet will come out of Wolford for Denver Water's substitution obligation to Green Mountain Reservoir this year. For the recovery programs, 6,000 acre foot fish pool, we only have 570 acre feet available this year. So that will be released, but it's a drop in the bucket for what they usually expect from Wolford. We will be able to fulfill all of our contracts. I put a range here because we have a certain amount of contracts actually contracted, but they're not all scheduled. So the low end is what's actually been scheduled. Some people can adjust. And so we've planned to be able to deliver everything that's been contracted, whether or not it's scheduled. And then basically the rest of the water available in our water marketing pool has been set aside for our drought mitigation releases this year. And then Elkhead, similar with the inflow this year, lowest on record. But because Elkhead is such a small bucket on such a large creek relative to the size of the reservoir, it's actually still at a normal elevation for this time of year. Despite that lowest inflow on record, we filled and spilled for a couple of months at Elkhead. So we are in fairly normal operations there, but we will be releasing a bit more than usual this year. So we have the full 7,000 acre feet for the recovery program that will be released. We have 2,000 acre feet for the Yampa River Reservoir Release Program. So that's an option contract with the Colorado Water Trust that will be used likely entirely for fall prevention this year. We began those releases last week, just ramped them up yesterday. So we're going to keep the call off the river at the moment. We have an additional 420 acre feet in drought relief for Yampa Valley agriculture. So that's going to folks that contracted with us for basically the rest of the water we had available in our water marketing pool. So that will be going to irrigators on Elkhead Creek and in the Yampa Basin. And then I have TBD for Tri-State Generation and Transmission in the city of Craig. I put their pool volumes up here. They are both able to draw from these. We don't have any set plans, but expect them to make some releases this year, which the city of Craig has actually never made releases from this pool, but they're finally able to this year and likely to. And then Tri-State also rarely uses their water, but are likely to this year with how dry it's been. And that's all we have unless there are more questions.
You don't have any more pain to pass around?
Save the rest for October.
All right, well, if we don't have any more questions on that, let's take a quick break until like 20 to 4. Come back at 20 to 4.
Thank you.
Yep. Too many people with pent up emotions back there in the back, on top of each other. So before we get started back on the agenda, Gail, would you come up here to the table and sit there for a minute? Please. Yeah, we're gonna give you a good rousing here.
My backup, my wingman.
What I wanted to do is I wanted to take a few moments and introduce a lady that's helped us here at River District for a number of years, has made our job over in the building easier, and has probably made some of the staff's job easier. So what I'd like to do is introduce you to Gail Berry. Gail has been one of our lobbyists. She served for a couple of 2 terms out of Grand Junction.
4 terms.
Oh, you turned.
Oh, yeah, it was one of those.
Served a full sentence. I guess.
That's full sentence, that's right.
She's been a great help, and so I wanted to introduce you to her as she's walking out the door, because she's gonna retire. And, you know, I just wanted to thank you, Gail, for the work you've done, the help you've been, and the friend that you've been.
Thank you.
And nobody will be interrupting your internet sessions from now on.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And what Chairman Senator Catlin is referring to, I would see him every morning in the state capitol. I'm one of those early rural girl people, and he would come by as I was on the internet doing my emails and always interrupt me, which was a welcome interruption. Not an interruption, but thank you very much for your kind words. It's my honor really to represent the River District. You are great. I love your issues, and nothing more important to all of Colorado, but especially Western Colorado where my heart is. So thank you.
You've been a great help. Thank you very much.
Gail is gonna join us for dinner tonight, so
Yeah.
if you will be around, we can all, and I will say, with her retirement, Zane's gonna have to work harder.
We'll see just how effective he is.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll see how effective she's been.
Oh, she's been effective.
That's right.
Great, drought mitigation. So, before I turn it over to the, people who actually know what they're talking about, I just want to thank our technical staff. These are 3 of our representatives, but the entire technical team has worked incredibly hard this year to try to figure out solutions for our water users in our communities. Where we have been able to create those solutions, I think they've worked really well and really appreciated. Where we've had the resources, we could move things around. It's been impressive. It is an ongoing challenge and one that I think Peter and others have alluded to, but it changes every day. And these guys are engineers. These folks are engineers. They would prefer certainty and clarity and black lines and rules. And none of that has existed this year for them and their profession. And they're all still smiling and they're all still working really well. And I just want to say I appreciate the entire tech team for the work they're doing. But I'm going to turn it over. And I think if I'm not mistaken, Hunter, are you going to go first on the Yampos?
Yeah.
However, not one of them is smiling. I have to say.
That's only because they're in front of you and they're scared. They're also engineers and they don't like talking in public.
I've also seen the reports we've listened to, so they're probably not very happy either.
Well, thank you, Andy. And yeah, I get the relatively simple task of giving an update on the Yampa relative to certainly Colorado. So Sam was referencing this earlier. We have a couple of pools in Elkhead. Elkhead's our biggest lever for helping out with drought and the Yampa River Basin. The two pools are the Yampa River Reservoir Release Program pool. That's a 2,000 acre foot pool. It's a multi-year project that we work on with the Colorado Water Trust. We began releasing for that last Monday, I believe it was, at 10 CFS. The idea of that water is to help prevent a call on the Yampa River so that all of the irrigators can continue to do what they do best. We're bumping that up as of yesterday up to 35 CFS. So currently we have about 1,800 acre feet left in that pool. At 35 CFS, we'll run out of that water in about 3.5 weeks. That said, we're going to keep an eye on hydrology and forecasts, and we'll be adjusting that flow either up or down depending on where demands and where what happens with this precipitation. The other pool that I want to update you on is the 420 acre foot drought mitigation pool. So that's a pool that we funded 25% with the CFP program and 75% with the CWCB. It was essentially free water for agricultural irrigators. We advertised it, we got some applications, and we now have contracts with 3 irrigators in the Yampa River Basin. We're starting releases from that tomorrow for one of the structures. In the remaining structures, that water will be released if a call comes on. So those are 2 pools in the Yampa. That's been kind of a ever evolving project, but it seems to be working out pretty well. It's honestly, especially that 2,000 acre foot pool. We've been working really well with DWR and the downstream senior calling right. I think it's worked better this year than any before. Just people appreciate the severity of the issue, and they've been really willing to work with us and try to put that water to good use.
Thank you.
We're going to jump over to the Gunnison. If you would like to follow along, we have a memo on page 155 of the PDF. So kind of bouncing around it a little bit, but we'll jump over to the Gunnison.
And this should be a quick update, given that I mentioned a lot of these issues in the hydrology report. I just do want to give a shout out to Caleb. He's been really instrumental in the Gunnison and has been in so many reservoir operations meetings and so many other meetings and helped with a lot of the coordination. When we continue to have these coordinations and convene meetings with stakeholders, there's one even scheduled for Friday of this week, the surface water accounting team for Division 4 that we're looking forward to. And I think what this year has raised is the importance of having guidance in how the Aspinall unit is operated during long-term drought. The record of decision doesn't have real guidelines on how things should function in years like this. And it becomes complicated to be reactive in a drought year like this. So we're hoping that these conversations will happen sooner rather than later. And I'll leave it there and turn it over to Brandon.
So I'm gonna touch on the Colorado River. We've heard a lot about it already today through the hydrology and other discussions. So I'll just cover some brief things. We've also talked a lot in the Water Supply Projects Subcommittee. So we've been having bi-weekly meetings there. And I really appreciate all the board for participating in those and leading those. And thank you, Director Vandenbrink, for heading up that subcommittee. That has been really helpful for us in order to get some insights from you. But also to keep moving this along. And I appreciate all the feedback that we received. So thank you for all the time put into that over the last couple months. And so a lot of this was discussed at subcommittee, so I'm just going to touch it pretty high level. But we did get, back in April, when we last came before the board, you gave us some directions. We have, on the Colorado River, we've been able to accomplish all of those to date. Not fully yet, but we've at least set everything in place to be achieved. We had two big goals. One was for domestic and municipal sides, and then we also had an irrigation plan. So I'm going to talk about those separately. For the municipal and domestic portions of the plan, we worked with DWR really closely, and we received an approved emergency substitute water supply plan on June 1st. We also worked with the CWCB to secure an in-stream flow loan to help pay for some of that program. And so both of those were accomplished. Our plan started to release water a few days after it was approved. We released approximately 490 acre feet in June. Most of that all came from Wolford because it was really addressing the Shoshone call for the majority of that time. We did have a few days of the Cameo call, and we were able to release about just under 17 acre feet out of Grizzly Reservoir. And so that was one of the alternative sources that we approved for our plan. It was water donated by Pickens County. We had up to 58 or 44 acre feet, somewhere around there. But just timing didn't work well. So we did get about 17 acre feet out of that, which was great. In July so far, we have released about 30.6 acre feet. And the reason for that reduction is because one of the categories that we are covering was only for the month of June. So there's three categories that we are covering. One was for the HUP, municipal and domestic depletions. Another was for Green Mountain Reservoir contracts. And the third was for decreed augmentation plans that didn't have enough supplies for our full month of June call. And so a lot of our June releases was for that third category. According to direction from DWR, we are not releasing HUP water to date. So they want that water, the HUP, to basically be depleted or limited before we start to release our water to cover those entities. And so we have held off on that to date, but we are releasing for the Green Mountain Reservoir contracts in July. Also, our second alternative supply was Lake Granby through a Middle Park Water Conservancy District contract. Those releases did start on the 16th of July, just recently. So we're pleased that we do have some water coming out there. That's been a long time coming. With our HUP releases, we are waiting for that HUP to be depleted or restricted. We are guessing that will happen once substitution volumes are depleted, and we're thinking that that's going to happen about the end of July. And so at that time, we'll start to switch over and we'll start making our releases for the HUP domestic and municipal to make sure that those entities are covered through without any curtailment this year. So all that is in place. Our emergency substitute water supply plan is approved through the end of August. So starting as we come into August, we're going to start making preparations for how to keep that going. And so we have some ideas there, and need to coordinate with the Division of Water Resources. But our plan is to have protection for this plan all the way through the year. And so that's a lot of our municipal and domestic plans. The irrigation plan, we haven't released any water for that yet. Again, Well, let me back up. The main goal that we had was to try and help irrigators throughout the whole basin. And so we spent a lot of the time the last couple of months working with the Grand Valley irrigators and talking with them and trying to understand their needs and what their concerns are for the year. And also trying to balance that with what irrigators upstream would need. And so a big ask of ours was to really delay the declaration that the check case would be inoperative. So this is the Orchard Mesa check case that kind of runs and helps identify how the HUP should be operated. Once that's declared inoperative, then the HUP beneficiaries are put on alert. So these are all the upstream irrigators and users that are junior to the Cameo call all the way up to 1977. So there's this window there that are protected by the HUP, the Historic Users Pool in Green Mountain Reservoir. And in order to maintain protections for those, that check case needs to be operative. So when they declared it, or when they would declare it inoperative, it's a put on notice. And then once the HUP pool is depleted, then they would start curtailing those HUP beneficiaries in priority until all of them are curtailed. We really wanted to protect the HUP beneficiaries because they're all throughout the Colorado River Basin and make sure that they at least got a cutting okay. And so our goal was to keep that HUP beneficiaries in priority till at least July 1st. And that was one of the kind of negotiations that we had with the Grand Valley, is that we'll supply some water for you later in the year, but we want to make sure that the upper basin irrigators are protected too. And so they did agree to that. They held off, and on July 1st, they did declare the check case inoperative. We are currently working through the HUP supplies before they start to curtail those. But again, as I said a few minutes ago, we're expecting that HUP to be restricted at least by the end of July, in which case that's when we're expecting some curtailment of the HUP beneficiaries, probably beginning of August. Our plan, we have about somewhere around 12 to 13,000 acre feet that we can provide for irrigators, the Grand Valley irrigators. That water, we're expecting them to start asking for once the HUP is, the amounts are limited. So again, coming on about the beginning of August. As Sam had mentioned in the hydrology update, 2/3 of that water is in Rudai, 1/3 of that is in Wofford. And we know that there's some limitations on the Rudai Reservoir outlet fall. So we are doing a lot of coordination, reaching out to a lot of water users and public entities up there as those flows are likely to increase coming out of Rudai Reservoir. So we're aware of that and really trying to coordinate how everything is going to, how all the different releases from all the different supplies are going to work and what that means specifically for the frying pan, which has some sensitivities. But yeah, so that's where we're at. We're in a good place. We're moving forward on our plan. It's been implemented. We've received lots of phone calls of just thanks and appreciation from across the basin as different users, were really stuck in what to do with water this year. And so this big step that this board and the district has put together, I think, is being recognized by others. We've heard a lot from Grand Valley and from the SIL project and others who are just really appreciative of the work that we've done to make sure that we can do everything we can to help support their entities as well. So I just wanted to carry that through to you guys and make sure that you knew the appreciation that we're hearing on a daily basis. So that's our update. If there's any questions, the three of us are happy to answer. Thanks.
Not seeing any questions? Well, thank you so much, you guys. Appreciate it. Thank you. Next item is the new item 6E, the Colorado River District wildfire roll. Amy Moyer is going to take the lead on this discussion. With wildfires, we're often asked as the district to step in and help in various ways. And Amy and Melissa have taken the lead in putting together and working with our multidisciplinary team, come up with some kind of framework that the staff approaches both pre and post fire issues. Wanted to kind of run it by the board, make sure that the board help thinks that we're fulfilling our mission and hitting the areas where we should. And also staying out of the areas where we shouldn't be spending our time and resources. So fire mitigation is one of those things that no matter how much or fire response, excuse me, is one of those areas where a community is in crisis and often turns to folks like the River District for a lot of help. And there are areas where we can't help, and there are areas that would just swallow us whole if we tried to help, and probably wouldn't be the most effective at helping as well. So, Amy, I'll turn.
Yeah, no, thanks, Andy. I think especially with the fire season we're experiencing, it's something we learn every year, every season, every different fire as to how we can play a role and be a trusted resource. But like Andy mentioned, we're also not an emergency response agency. And so we have been working just preemptively ahead of this fire season as a staff, knowing that when fires impact our district, it often takes a team across our small team of 25, but it takes our CFP program, it takes our technical staff, it takes us being a conduit for the relationships that we have to work with our water users. So we set out this year just to try and stay consistent as a team as to how do we communicate with communities and water users when they are experiencing a crisis like a wildfire, so that we can be as supportive as possible, but also stay within the realm of influence and opportunity that we have. So we felt like it would make sense to give a high level overview to the board of how we participate in various response and recovery efforts for wildfire. So Melissa's going to cover especially the conversations that we have on CFP. I'll talk a little bit about the role we play with our assets and reservoir operations, but may kind of pinch hit with Hunter for a few moments here if there are questions on how we operate Wolford and Elkhead in the context of fire. But really, when we think of the active wildfire response, our role is really primarily a connector. So we work closely with our water users and communities to make sure that they are immediately connected with the emergency managers within the state at the Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. There's often a state recovery task force that gets formed. We try to make sure that that task force knows who we are and that our communities and counties are involved with those emergency management agencies. We often work with the NRCS Emergency Watershed Protection Program as really a first line of funding, especially for projects that are immediately needed to protect life and property. We're in communication with our water users early to understand, what are the water impacts that we're seeing, whether it's water supply or we're anticipating runoff issues. So one of the small teams that I'll talk about is with the Gold Mountain Fire. That's one that we're paying close attention to. Caleb has been in contact with water users, participating in local reservoir operations calls and keying in on what are we starting to hear about either concerns or early impacts related to that fire. One of the lessons learned from the Lee and Elk fire was that there are often daily incident command meetings when you're in an active wildfire response. And what can be helpful is to try and make sure that there are representatives from our local ag organizations or water users that either know where water infrastructure is on the ground, know where cattle is, know the connections as firefighters are working on scene, and it's a tense moment. Also making sure that we have the DWR reps, the USGS reps engaged at the right places. And then we'll talk about our assets a little bit more, but making sure that if our reservoirs are being used for scooping, one of the areas that we're paying close attention to is how to include ANS inspections as part of that process. Where do we not play a role? We're not emergency responders. We're not an emergency response agency. We don't haul water ourselves or serve as that emergency point of contact, yet we do try to be a trusted resource. We're often called upon during these situations, and we try to be that conduit and expediter of let's get folks connected to the right places when there's an active wildfire. When we move into recovery, we're both a connector, but also play a role as a funder. And so I'll let Melissa talk on the next slide about where we've played a role with our community funding partnership, where we haven't. But again, you start to see these task forces getting set up, these conversations about, okay, we're starting to see the list of projects that we have. We try to play a role in that to understand where is the nexus for us from either water quality, water supply standpoint. Where might we play a role when local matches are needed to help support something like the NRCS Emergency Watershed Protection Program. We make sure that there's a local champion that can help play those roles. We can play a certain amount of convener roles, but it's really dependent on your local communities and counties that need to step up because wildfire is a lot more than just water supplies. So we don't typically act as the fiscal sponsor for emergency watershed protection plan. I think our counties have in large part played a significant role in that. We don't typically conduct our own in-house water quality data, but again, that's where we try to support getting folks like the USGS involved and look at where our CFP dollars could help support monitoring systems. And in terms of debris flows, that's an area where, we can play a role if we're protecting bridges and roads. We need to work with those communities with the resources that they have. But it's a good setup into just this table of, where has CFP in particular played an important role? Where are there some site-specific discussions that might be needed? And where do we typically not play a role? So Melissa, I'll let you cover that.
Yeah, and I'd preface that with an obvious statement that every fire is different. And so we've listed out what's eligible generally, what requires more discussion, and what's not eligible. What's eligible is what aligns with our 5 benefits under CFP. We have funded wildfire ready action plans and are ready and prepared to talk about the projects that have been identified in those. We're really looking at, hey, how do we ensure that our water sources continue to be available, whether it's through ag, through municipalities. And of course, water quality monitoring is important, and redundant water sources continue to be on our radar. What requires more discussion is if a project is on federal or state public land, and how that might play an impact to our private land and our constituents. Re-veg, reseeding, just the general things that come after a fire require more discussion. And then, as Amy said, we're not a response team, so what's not eligible is river cleanup, bank armoring, just whatever quick items need to be done to keep a community moving forward when it comes to their infrastructure. So this is just a picture of what we've done in the past, but knowing that every conversation is dynamic.
And we do try to be nimble and responsive. We felt like this is a good picture for the board to just understand, like Melissa said, of where we have been. We don't know what we'll continue to see as the wildfire season progresses and really becomes a longer and longer season every year. In terms of our assets, we've broken this up into preparation and then during the fire. So before the fire season, Hunter has done a great job of communicating with our partners at the U.S. Forest Service, seeing what agreements we might be able to put in place ahead of time, talking about, where can we add in as protocols where we can, knowing that, this is operating in a crisis, but it is something that we need to pay attention to at this point in this stage of our ANS outbreaks and spread across our state. We need to be aware and review our egress plans for our own CRD-owned recreation areas. During the fire, a large part is communicating with incident command, communicating with water users, other water managers, coordinating with U.S. Forest Service and their fire suppression contractors if they are going to use our reservoirs as a dipping site, working with our own recreation operators so that we can clear the reservoirs and make sure that it is safe for those accessing the reservoir and for the planes or helicopters that might be scooping, and of course monitoring if there are fires in proximity of our assets, paying close attention to that. So one of the lessons learned for us as a team is pulling together, like I mentioned at the beginning, some interdisciplinary efforts at the staff level of how can we work together as a team, have one point of contact. You know, we often have seen with these with fires, you know, folks will call whoever on our staff that they have a relationship with. And so making sure that we communicate internally has been important. So we've set up just a framework of having a technical team lead. Those are typically our folks that you see at your basin roundtables, a water quality point of contact, involvement and connections with the forest health arena, and involvement with our community funding partnership and with our communication team as the fire progresses and moves into recovery. An example that we've already started to set up is on the Gold Mountain fire. So Caleb has been our technical point of contact. He helps communicate with us on what he's hearing on the ground, what projects are emerging. Melissa has been in contact with Uray County as they're starting to set up their EWP process. And then we're looping in Matt and Lindsay, so they're aware of both how are we involved and to the extent they receive requests for help as communities are trying to talk with their constituents or communicate more broadly. So that's what we have for you in terms of our overall picture and relationship with wildfires, but happy to answer any questions or hear any feedback.
And I do want to add one thing that I think one of the most important things we can do is help our communities who do not currently have redundant domestic water supply. There's a fairly significant number of our communities that have one source of domestic water, and therefore one watershed catches on fire or is damaged through free flow caused by a fire, the impact can be huge. And so we are working, and in fact, presently identifying a staff member to be our municipal liaison to kind of work with these our West Slope communities to try to help them identify that problem and help develop solutions to that problem. So there are things we can do as Amy and Melissa just laid out in terms of the response, but I think ideally we're helping them prepare for it on the front end. So just identify that.
So one of the things I saw that's eligible are structures. And in mind with you deal with structures, a lot of those are going to be insured. So FEMA years ago just laid out lots of money. And the insurance companies stayed silent about, oh, we have that property insured. And then FEMA went finally, after it was brought to their attention, recovered that money that the insurance companies were obligated to pay. So I think one of your questions, if you get especially into the structure, is do you have fire insurance? And if we give you money to help you immediately, if you receive money from the insurance company to cover that loss, that you have restitution due to the CRD, just keep that in mind in structures. A lot of them will have insurance.
Sonia?
I think just one area that I wanted to have a conversation with the board on this matter. I did visit with Amy about this and Melissa as well is. Right, it's that same argument that if we're only addressing the after the wildfire impacts, we're spending way more money potentially than what we could have done to prevent it. So I like the idea of supporting things like wildfire ready action plans. And I know the town of Crested Butte has done one that has identified several key water infrastructure things, including redundancy, the municipal pipeline, which is sitting 4 feet above a stream that would be at a severe risk of debris flow. But I also wonder about, Melissa and I attended a stakeholder meeting organized by the National Wild Turkey Federation, and there were county commissioners there and others talking about what is the role and what could be the partnership role of water districts or water providers and helping to address this issue that we have around forest vegetation management. And right there have to be boundaries, there have to be sidelines. But I think that I wonder if there could be a role. I know the Yampa Water Conservancy District has taken some steps on this to do things like source water protection where there is some element of forest vegetation management in there to protect source water areas, right? We can't do the whole forest. You know, we don't have enough funding, we don't have enough resources. A lot of people, including me, believe that it's our federal government's responsibility to take care of our forest service systems, but how can we be a partner in that? Because town of Crested Butte's an ideal example where it's the highest risk area in the Gunnison Basin, and just getting the funding and the NEPA done to get just some source water protection done in a smaller area has been tough. And I know Yampa established $150,000 annual grant program where people could come to them for funding to address things identified in a wildfire ready action plan, including some forest vegetation management. And I'm interested in hearing from other directors how you feel about that or what your thoughts are. You know, I think that some of the things the Upper Gunnison has done, includes just wet meadow restoration or reconnection of floodplains, right? Where you can reduce wildfire debris flow risks by 50% by just ensuring that these areas are healthy, because that's what's going to capture all the sediment that comes down. You know, when we say we don't fund river cleanup, would we fund projects like that help to mitigate? I know under the Water Conservancy Act, one of the things that we're charged with is wildfire mitigation. And that's conservancy districts. So Alden, I was curious on what you thought, and you had discussions with your board too.
Well, thank you, because what we've done in the past, and I believe the River District was actually a partner in this, was back in the 1990s. We aggressively went out there and constructed about 12 to 1,500 check dams. And they varied from sizes to a little dam the size of this table to something as big as a football field. And all they were was to slow the water down. So if you had a fire going through a drainage, and you would see them actually stair-stepped up through there. I actually gave a presentation on it last week to a group of people. Because you actually saw the healing of the drainage that was once an arroyo or a gully, whatever. Now it's grassed, it's a meadow, and then you get the little catch basin that over time it does needs maintenance. That's where the cost comes in. The dam is routed and constructed to catch water from even the side area to where it's directed into there to catch as much sediment. These were built in the 1990s, and we're 25% of them need some maintenance now. On the federal lands, that's where we run into complexities now, because they don't want to give you a permit to do that anymore. And you got to go through the NEPA. Granted, that's changed now. But what we have been able to do is successfully work through the conservation districts to get resource management plans that's cooperative between the landowner and the federal government, to where the landowners, if they have a lease for livestock in there or for whatever agricultural means, they can go in and under their agricultural piece, do some maintenance to that structure. And we've seen a significant number of those being renovated under that program. But we were offered a grant program with the conservation districts, 10 years ago. We probably got 24 of them completed before we ran out of funds, and it was just a cost share. We just tried to see where it goes. But there's more opportunity now that people are seeing the benefit that they did post-fire. And we're showing them what it did to Kenny Reservoir to make Kenny Reservoir last as long as it did, because it had a 30-year life on it. We're in year 45 because of those structures, and now we're dealing with the what if scenario on there. The fires is the what if. You can plan on the normal sediment, but the fire really adds to it. But now there's an opportunity to go back and start cleaning some of those up again. And if the landowner does it, it's a lot easier, but it really helps the watershed completely. And some of these they're altering the design, but they're staying within the same footprint. But really the design, I'm going to say, is just, how the water might leave to slow it down. So, but that's probably one of the key things that we did. We did also, like you said, a source water plan for the town of Rangeley. I realize that's from Rangeley all the way up. So that's not a little one. And trying to get anything through on the federal government side, where we talk with the people that do the range, BLM, and I seen they were omitted from your list too, BLM. But the Forest Service, they all get hung up on NEPA. We got to do NEPA. Before we do any health improvements, we got to go through that process. And going through that process, when I visit with the department heads, it's not simple anymore when you want to go through, do an area to improve vegetative growth, understory, clear out some of that, get a healthier landscape. And that's a 10-year process of its own anymore, because you're constantly being battled by NGOs that don't necessarily believe that you have to touch the landscape, you leave it alone. But then they're in panic mode when something catastrophic happens. We could have mitigated some of that, but they refuse to. So those are things that we've done proactively, and those were where I was gonna mention those ponds, because I think in the White River, now that we've seen more fires kind of pop up, that there'd be some folks that would like to clean them out and get them going again. And now with the permitting structure the way it is, it'd probably be a single page categorical exclusion. Where before it was gonna be an environmental assessment. Well, man, that's a big ordeal to clean out a pond the size of this, so move on. I'm gonna go into something else. That's what we did there for years, but it's coming back around.
I wonder if like advocacy for programmatic biological opinions, when you're doing some for a big area, include things like that in there so that you can respond and, I know that with the wet meadow restoration program, the BLM did put it into their programmatic biological opinion for the state. And so it is much easier for us to get out and work on those lands than it would be for us right now with the US Forest Service, for example. But I think there's some opportunity, I think, just maybe to move the needle in an advocacy role or a political role on some of these things to be more proactive.
And different, ours is more or less just trying to slow the water down. That's not really to store more water in areas, because that opens up other issues, to where we can slow it down, that does provide some benefits there itself, so.
Well, I mean, right, your check dams, a beaver dam operates the exact same way. Right?
Exactly.
And so I think, and then some of those areas probably just would stay and result back in wet meadows or something again, but I think where we have stream degradation and stuff like that, it's a great opportunity to get in there and you still have those multi benefits.
We have done in Pickens County a lot of work with beaver restoration, and we pay for 2 interns with the Forest Service to spend 2 summers in Pickens County and determine where we have beavers, where beavers used to be, ideal habitat for beavers, so that we can, like Alden said, slow the water and spread out the agrarian area. And, they did a lot of education with us when we were doing this, of the impact on wildfire, slowing down wildfires basically of beavers is pretty significant. And so we've put quite a bit of money and time into that. And we try to help people relocate their beavers, particularly ranchers who have a problem in their ditches and stuff. And that's one of the reasons we're looking for suitable places for beavers. And so it's ongoing. It's fairly nascent, but we've been working on it for a couple of years.
Even that conversation too, and Mark, I don't know if you were updated on it, right? It is that the one mill in this area in Montrose that still exists was being sold. And I think they had a buyer, I didn't hear if it actually went through, maybe Carrie heard something. But that is the only mill serving a really broad area of Colorado, and they said the main problem was that they couldn't get a second crew or online to make the mill profitable. So they've struggled, and that's in large part because of Forest Service mandates getting this high quality wood product out. Not a lot of the other stuff that we just need to get out to within these areas that's in there. So I don't know, even on a statewide level, if there's an opportunity to do something more, because at the rate that these forest systems are growing, we're never gonna get ahead of the problem.
And you're not gonna get a mill established until we get people to back off so that you can have a mill sitting there for 50 years. They're not gonna construct a mill for 5 years or one presidency and then turn around and hear the political atmosphere changes again.
Yeah.
That's a big part of it, because we have a mill up at Meeker. Turnkey, flip the breaker on, but they're not gonna do it because there's no guarantee that next year I'll have a product to keep
They
selling.
said sometimes they mobilize, we'll go to an
Yeah,
area.
and
something
then
changes
you're
and
working with
that's
the Forest Service, to where now the Forest Service, they get going on a project, and then there's a last minute injunction from some judge, and then, well, now you're sitting there and you got semi trucks lined up to go, and now the investor's scared away. So the atmosphere has to change for mindset on what needs to get done here. Because we as a society need to live too. but we're putting more emphasis on everything else except ourselves, so to a certain degree. So even the beavers, I mean, there's a love-hate, you know, where in our county, wherever there's beavers, it's usually private property because that's where the water is. And then you get those conflicts, and you can only move so many beavers around. I'm a lover because they don't need a water right and they don't need a permit to build a dam. So, but you got limitations there too, of where they fit in. So they do a lot of infrastructure damage too, so.
Right.
Thank you, President Callan. In terms of how the River District can help, I think you guys have laid out a good plan, and I know Uray County is trying to figure this out right now and finding match dollars to support the NRCS fund. That's going to be the most important thing we can do. Thinking long-term about mitigation and how we react to future fires is the concern Uray County has. We don't have the money in our budget now to provide the match dollars for the mitigation to react to this fire that we have on Cold Mountain. Let alone plan for the next fire. So we're trying to think long-term about how do we start setting money aside? And it's not just the fire. In 2024, I reached out to the CWCB watershed group, Stephen Reeves, and said, man, we've got flooding in Uray County every year because of really intense rain events. We lose county roads, ditches. All sorts of things happen, you know, you've driven through Uray, it's really steep. You get 2 inches of rain on those steep slopes, and now we have a fire on top of that. So we need to do some sort of like watershed planning to do the exact same type of thing that Alden was talking about. But when it comes to like our forest management, what we saw in that fire, it started burning beetle kill pine on 45-degree slopes above Uray. It moved into oak brush, narrowly missed a bunch of pinyon juniper. If it had gotten the pinyon juniper, it probably would have done some pretty terrifying damage, but it also would have cleaned up some forests that have skipped 4 or 5 fire cycles. None of that timber is saleable, none of it. No one's looking at us saying, boy, I'd like to get pinyon to the mill. That's not happening. So but if we could figure out a way to like start addressing this overgrowth with pinyon juniper and how to figure out some of the beetle kill problems that we have in Uray County, that might mitigate some of the fire risks we have coming in the near term. So really, it's that funding questions. What do we do now to find match dollars, but then also how do we prepare for the next flood and or fire?
And let me just say a couple things. One, I definitely hear you, and we've had a lot of internal staff discussions on wildfire preparedness and mitigation, watershed mitigation. We've worked previously with our federal delegation and the Forest Service to try to refocus their efforts on watersheds rather than the wildland urban interface zone, which is where they seem to focus. We will continue those efforts, but I do want to say something. I know the Water Conservancy District has that. But we are not a water
I was
conservancy
gonna
district.
ask you that. I wasn't trying to look that up.
Yeah, we don't have that in our organic statute. Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that we can't engage in it. And I think, you know, it's a little bit daunting, as I think it is to every organization. The amount of money involved per acre in mitigating largely federal land is really, I mean, from our perspective, it would swallow our entire budget if we got involved in it. Are there things we can do to help facilitate that, to argue for, categorical exclusions at both the BLM and the Forest Service? Can we argue for programmatic biological opinions that would encompass this kind of work? I think that's the kind of advocacy we probably could do. But what I'd like to suggest to the board is, I think it's been a really good conversation. We hear you. I would ask Amy and the rest of the team to go back and kind of try to reconnoiter and add and think about what it is we can really do in this area. And Amy, I don't know if you have other ideas.
Yeah, no, I had a similar thought, Andy, of I appreciate the board kind of immediately moving to the preparation stage. I think that's hugely important. It was not intentional to sort of sidestep that in our presentation. But I think it is important to look at where can we play a role, and we're played a role in helping communities look at redundant water sources. I think the Wildfire Ready Action Plan has been a great program for our state, and we've participated with a lot of Western Slope communities in getting those going. One of the things that Melissa and I have talked about is we need to start preparing for how are we going to implement those plans. And we're staring down, like Andy mentioned, huge costs. And I think it is a conversation we need to be a part of in terms of understanding the Forest Health water security nexus. And so I do think it's something that we can continue to think about. Where could we provide the most influence as a team with our community funding partnership, but also with our advocacy efforts. And so we'd be happy to continue that conversation with the board. Think about there are some nexus areas within our guidelines of the community funding partnership already that point to forest health treatments with a watershed health and water quality nexus. So there is an opening to continue this dialogue, but also making sure that it's the kind of appropriate size and scale for our organization.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Amy and Melissa. The next item on the agenda, Mr. President, is the briefing from Raquel Blinker on the Upper Colorado Wild and Scenic Group stakeholder group update. It's an update. It's in the memo. It's in the memo. It's in the binder. If anybody has questions, Raquel is available to answer them now or after the fact. I don't think we need a presentation on this subject unless anybody on the board desires. I will commend Raquel for being involved in that. That takes a lot of time and effort and frankly, more patience than I have. I would turn next, Rebecca, if I can, to this is a proposed action item, proposed approval of the Grand Lake Clarity Stakeholders Memo of Understanding. So Rebecca has the pleasure of serving as our district's representative on that. She gets some help with from Jason Turner and occasionally Peter, but I'll turn it over to Rebecca.
Yeah, since Jason's gone, it's just me today. So back in April, I was before you all to talk about the Grand Lake Clarity Adaptive Management Program and how that three-lake system operates a little bit. It's a bit of a complex system there with the Colorado Big Thompson and 3 different lakes. But essentially it's just kind of a really brief refresher. There's a group of stakeholders that includes the River District, the Bureau of Reclamation, Northern Water, Grand County, and others that use adaptive management to basically try to mitigate the impacts of the Colorado Big Thompson for water quality and water clarity in the three-lake system. And in particularly with Grand Lake, which is of course a very scenic attraction and a natural lake within Colorado. That adaptive management process was established through an MOU, and a memorandum of understanding that began in 2016 and was extended in 2022. And that memorandum of understanding is expiring at the end of this year. So over the past few months, these stakeholders or the MOU signatories to the original MOU have been negotiating a new long-term MOU. And this time the signatories were interested in having a more than just a few years MOU. And so we were negotiating a 30-year MOU. And the impetus for that is that the adaptive management process has been effective in improving Grand Lake clarity and water quality in the Three Lake system. And so the signatories to the MOU wanted to continue that work, and especially for the long term. We've learned a lot of lessons over the past 10 years in that adaptive management process to be able to have little tools to improve water quality, such as letting a settling period occur so that we can have sediment drop out to the bottom and have less turbid water, or mitigate some temperatures in Shadow Mountain Reservoir by changing the pumping timing. And so those have been really effective, and the signatories wanted to continue that. So we've completed those negotiations and we have a draft MOU. To give you kind of just an idea of this MOU, it is included in your board packet. But it does have a 30-year timeline. It would be effective starting January 1st of next year and would continue for 30 years through 2057. Hopefully none of us are sitting in this room when that time period comes, but it does have a opportunity for an extension at that point. And there are two main components of that agreement. The first one is that it does continue that operational adaptive management that the signatories agree have been effective. And then it also establishes a new component of this agreement, and that is the Three Lakes Clear Fund. And that will be for system projects and initiatives to improve water quality in the system. And I'll talk more about that in a second. And then the parties are the same parties as the original MOU, the River District, Grand County, Northwest Cog, the Bureau of Reclamation and Northern Water, with the addition of 3 new signatories, which include the town of Grand Lake, and then Northern Waters Municipal Subdistrict and Northern Waters Windy Gap for Project Enterprise. So I want to talk about the new component of this agreement. This is the Clear Fund. And so I have to remember what this stands for. It stands for Clarity, Legacy, Ecosystem, Adaptation, and Resilience. And essentially Northern Water is committing $30 million over 30 years into this fund for projects that are for improving watershed health, water quality, kind of a broad range of projects available to basically mitigate some of those impacts from the Colorado Big Thompson. It will be there will be cash contributions, and there will also be a reserve fund. So the intent from Northern Water is that the cash fund, the first year would be entirely a cash fund of $1 million annually. But then as the years go on, that cash fund and reserve fund would shift a little bit. And so in year 2, some money would go to the reserve fund. Still, the big portion would go to the cash fund, but with the intent that at the end of 30 years, there would be a significant amount of funding in the reserve fund that would enable this account to continue to fund projects after the end of this 30-year MOU term. This fund will be administered by Northern Water, and there will be a governance committee set up with 1 voting member for each signatory party to the MOU to make decisions on how that funding is spent on projects. Northern Water does have a must approve any of those projects or any of that funding distribution. So each party does have 1 vote, but it has to be approved by Northern Water as well, and a majority of the signatories. And so some of the potential projects that, I think we don't know all of the projects that may come up in the next 30 years, but right now Northern Water and the stakeholders are investigating how mysis shrimp removal and harvesting in the Grand Lake area could potentially improve water clarity. It's something that's been effective at Lake Tahoe. So there could be a harvesting pilot program that gets funded by this fund. Aquatic nuisance species could be an area of funding, or aquatic plant mitigation. So pretty broad ranging projects that this fund is intended to fund to help improve water quality and clarity.
Shrimp?
Yeah. I don't know if they're technically a shrimp, but that is what they're called.
I gotta look that one up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You harvested with lake.
So yeah, the mysis shrimp is kind of a strange one that I've learned about. But essentially the mysis shrimp are not native to Grand Lake. They're there in abundance. And they're really good for making fish populations bigger, so anglers like them. But they actually consume another aquatic, I forget it, some kind of invertebrate species, I think, that actually does clean the water. So they're consuming what is.
Quagga mussels, shrimp.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think zebra mussels are also a filter cleaner. So we definitely don't want zebra mussels in Grand Lake, but they do improve water clarity. Yeah, so The recommendation from staff is that board approve the Grand Lake stakeholders MOU and authorize the general manager to execute the MOU on behalf of the River District. But I'm happy to take questions or comments on that.
I haven't read the MOU. Does it pull us into a financial obligation, or Northern's gonna handle it with their $1 million? Or just-
Yeah, thanks, Director McGinnis. I forgot to mention that. So that was something that was really important to us, is we wanted to make sure that, you know, West Slope dollars weren't required to be contributed to these projects in order to receive the funding from Northern Water. It is not required. They have said that they really want this fund to be a catalyst for bringing matching funding to the table, but that matching funding could be from state or federal sources, and there's no requirement for West Slope funds.
That's good, because Andy, I don't have the stomach to give $1. Northern gets to decide at the end of it whether we're.
No, we're not providing funding for this. This is a problem caused by the Northern Project, not by anybody in West Slope. And they need to solve the problem. There's no question about that.
Thank you.
And just to add to that, that governance committee where Northern Water has to approve, obligation of funding, that is only for using that $30 million of funding. So if there's, say, a project that the other stakeholders are interested in pursuing and Northern Water does not want to fund it, the other stakeholders can still pursue that project. They do not have a veto vote on that, just on the funding.
Well, we need a motion to accept staff's recommendation.
I'll move to approve the Grand Lake stakeholders MOU and authorize the general manager to execute the MOU on behalf of the Colorado River Water Conservation District.
Motion by Jacoba, who's second?
Second.
Gary. Dennison, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
Thank you.
Motion passed.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Next item is an update on our 2025 to 2030 strategic plan implementations. Audrey and Amy, you guys want to come on up and give the board an update? I do want to remind the board that you did approve a new strategic plan, and that Amy and Audrey are responsible for it. So if you have problems with it, talk to them. No, but it's a great plan, and it, I do believe that the district is implementing it with, make sure that you get it.
Okay, I just realized I got kicked off the Zoom, so let me just get out there real fast. Last PowerPoint presentation from me today, so. But as I get this up, I just want to remind the board that we have provided short written updates throughout the year since the board adopted the plan in July. And, as we adopted the plan last July, we anticipated that we would provide a little bit more of an in-depth update in terms of our strategic plan implementation over the year. And so Audrey and I will do that on behalf of a lot of our team that has played an essential role in moving the strategic plan forward. We'll talk about the structure that we've set up that is much more than just Audrey and I, but we will go over the update here today. Here it is. And we'll get going. So just a reminder that over about a 1.5-year process beginning in 2024, this board adopted a revised strategic plan with a 5-year time horizon of 2025 to 2030. This is a more actionable strategic plan that surrounds 4 focus areas. But first, just a quick summary of where we've been. This board has first adopted a strategic plan in 2013. It's been revised a few times over the last decade. And truly the impetus behind having a strategic plan is really to help us think long-term, help us better align our staff resources. This has helped us be a much more interdisciplinary team where we don't think about our silos, but we really work together with an aim towards better decision-making, having a better lens towards what are the opportunities and threats heading our way and for our water users, while also being able to continually monitor and adapt, knowing that can't foresee the future. Years like this have really pushed us in that direction. But the 4 focus areas that the plan surrounds are community protection, with an eye towards protecting and strengthening water security across our communities, being a trusted resource to provide trusted data, information, education, analyses that can guide our water users and policymakers as we're confronting key decisions across our district and across the West Slope. We want to have an eye towards being a recognized leader on Colorado River matters, and core services, which is looking at how do we continually assess our capacity and our resources to maximize our effectiveness and always have a strong lens towards respecting our taxpayer investments. And so where we've been since last July, the board adopted the strategic plan in July of 2025. We then pulled our staff internally to develop working groups that's focused on each of these focus areas, and spend some time reviewing where are their existing efforts. You know, these are elements that we have long pushed forward as part of the River District mission. Where are we better aligning our resources and looking to where can staff really internalize these themes as part of our work of how are we a trusted resource and how are we thinking about how to best protect our communities. And we have some really strong examples of that we've put in your board packet of, you know, you've heard about our drought response efforts in 2026. We were nimble, we worked with our water users, we were collaborative, we listened. How do we uphold these values? And then we worked as teams as to recognizing that this is a 5-year plan. We don't need to start out trying to achieve every element of the strategic plan yesterday, but how do we put those building blocks in place so that we can achieve those long-term outcomes that we set forward in our strategic plan? And then we're here today to provide a more in-depth update of what is the structure that we've put in place and get some feedback as to how we're truly starting to initiate this, and still at some of the building stages of implementing this strategic plan. So our work group structure, again, we're a team of 25, 4 work groups. We really rely on every single member of this organization on so many topics. We're really not a siloed group. So we have smaller key teams that are focused on more of those tactical incremental steps as to how do we move forward. But we recognize that we needed these expanded conversations that involved our leadership and involved many team members across the district to provide their institutional knowledge, provide their feedback on items. So Audrey and I are going to walk through just high level where some of these work groups have been, both some of our successes over the last year and what we're focused on and some of the building blocks that we're working towards as part of this strategic planning process. So first on community protection, I think there's been many accomplishments that we can point to in terms of how we are serving our communities. The Shoshone Water Rights is a great example of what can be possible if we think legacy level, think long-term, and how do we replicate that thinking across our other basins? But certainly a milestone was getting through the in-stream flow process last year. We've had 5 years of the CFP program, and I think we've seen how it can be nimble and think innovatively of participating in our drought response efforts. It's participated in having financial conversations and getting our irrigation companies prepared for the future. And then certainly our 2026 drought response is a great example of that mindset. Where this work group is going is really thinking on 2 parallel levels of we've recognized that there are threats and opportunities that are district-wide. Those are conversations like, how do we protect our communities if we have long-term conserved consumptive use programs? How do we start thinking about what is the nature of compact curtailment in the future? How do we think about these large scale threats like forest health that are threats across all of our basins in our district? And so thinking through what's the information that we need to gather to be able to come to you with some informed decisions of here's how we might tackle this and best prepare our communities. So we're really starting to think about those information gaps and where do we have influence on these larger existential threats. And then on the basin-wide specific opportunities, really thinking about how do we engage more collaboratively with our roundtables, with our water users to get a sense of what are your priorities that CFP could potentially play a greater role in, or how do we use our resources as a district to move the needle on basin-specific priorities and build those coalitions that have been so important and critical for the Shoshone water rights effort. So how do we look at replicating some of that across our district?
Okay, well, mine will be shorter than yours, Amy. On the trusted resource, so there's a lot of accomplishments, as Amy mentioned, that we can point to demonstrate that we are a trusted resource in water issues in Western Colorado and the entire basin. Some of the accomplishments we can point to specifically are, the touch points we've had with hundreds of attendees through our 2025 annual seminar and all of our State of the River events that we held over the spring. Lindsay and Matt will be talking about that more specifically in their update tomorrow and in the Information and Outreach Committee. Raquel had previously talked about the science-based runoff forecasting workshop that she really spearheaded to get a large, well, not a large, but a very impressive group of scientists and constituents together. Some of our directors were there too, to really understand the tools, the data, the research that is needed to help inform forecasting and help our operators and water suppliers as best as possible. Melissa and Sam worked really hard on the CFP Impact Dashboard, which is a great tool and resource to understand how our dollars are being put to the ground and to really benefit our constituents. The things that we are also still exploring and continuing are partnerships with different institutions and educational organizations. The CMU Water Center partnership is a good one that we can point to, and we're trying to understand where else we may be able to have something similar with those sorts of institutions. We're also trying to understand the priority research needs, which is really fed from the community protection work group. That's where is additional data need to be collected? What additional research do we need to do? And how can we potentially fund that through the CFP or our general fund dollars? We're also working on making sure our external materials are accessible and digestible for all audiences, and making sure that those are readily available through all of our external outreach tools that we have available. Policymaker engagement, we do a great job with that, but we're trying to understand if there's opportunities there where we can be more effective or more targeted or provide additional research or outreach with that additional data. And then we're also still trying to understand what the water resources library might look like. We're trying to define the scope of that, and also, what is the appropriate platform for that water resources library? So that is one of maybe the more longer term implementation efforts, just really trying to make sure that that is achievable, sustainable, and be intentional about what that looks like.
The third focus area is being a recognized leader on Colorado River matters. I think this is leaning into really our 2-point mission of how do we protect our entitlements on the Colorado River? How are we recognized and sought after for our technical and political leadership on these topics? A strong area of focus that continues for us is how do we engage in the post-2026 process? We developed robust comments on the draft DIS and also worked with our communities to help support them in providing feedback so that our voice matters in those discussions. We've spent a lot of effort looking at how do we strengthen our relationships, not only within the state, but across the basin so that our influence can be greater. Other examples is really digging into these topics like conserved consumptive use. How do we play a role in protecting our communities? And then how do we maintain a strong technical presence? I think that has been something that we really leaned on Raquel and Stephen to provide. Examples of that was our most recent board discussion on really digging into our consumptive use and how is that calculated? How do we play a role in those discussions? Going forward, those are the kind of key actions that we're looking at in this group.
And just lastly, before we open it up for discussion and direction, is core services. So core services, some of our accomplishments are, the reservoir operations and the ability to operate those and serve our constituents during the drought mitigation actions that we've been talking about. We've implemented an accessibility software on our website to make sure that our information, as I mentioned before, under trusted resource is as accessible and effective as possible. We've also done a number of IT improvements with our new IT contractor and improving network security. Some of the future actions, we're going to be working on updating our pro forma, looking at a 10-year planning horizon, working on our water marketing program and some strategies moving forward. We'll really be able to take some lessons learned from this water year and sort of understand what changes, if any, we want to make in our water marketing program. And then we're also working on some long-term O&M tracking tools. So we've obviously been doing all of the O&M needs that we have for all of our assets, but we're working to organize and develop a tracking tool that we can apply to all of our River District owned assets. And then also just understanding, where technology can improve our efficiency and effectiveness. So understanding AI, we've talked about in the past with the board, really understanding what tools we can use and where that can improve some of our efficiencies. We've also been utilizing Power BI to help with the data visualization. And so we're just really understanding what other technology tools are out there to help us do our work as best as we can. And then also focusing on cross-training, recognizing we have a small team, making sure that we have our critical tasks covered, succession planning, and professional development opportunities as well. Okay, I think that's their last update on our focus areas.
Yeah, so we welcome board feedback on some of these steps that we're taking to implement the plan. I think a lot of the, discussion that we hear from these board meetings really influences how we move these concepts forward. And I wouldn't discount just the institutionalizing these focus areas as values that we uphold at the district. And that's been an important shift just in our culture over the last year. And as we've worked across teams to put this really at the top of our minds of always falling back to, are we upholding these concepts in our daily work? So Audrey and I will continue to put written updates in our board memos, and then we'll continue to provide a more in-depth verbal update over the years as we implement this.
Okay. Sonia?
I think just having been a former staff member, I'm really excited about the way that you guys are working together now as teams and how that kind of fits all into the strategic planning. So sounds really cool.
Alden?
Pretty critical here. I heard a theme with this that I heard, and it matches earlier from Andy. And you're building a legacy, and this is part of the format to build your legacy. It's good to see that it's not just you today. You're looking at the next generation coming in, and he's looking at his succession as well. More of that needs to happen, and that's a good model that you're building upon here. The board adopted that strategic plan, and I'm very happy to see where this direction is going. It shows that you're here for the long term, but you want to build something that you're darn proud of too, so that the next folks can come in here and have the same amount of pride as you all exude in here. So.
Anybody else? Okay, that's pretty good.
Thank you very much. And Amy, the next item is a resolution for Steve Wolf, who was the general manager at the Southwestern Water Conservation District. He's retiring after 5 years of being at the Southwestern. I can tell you, staff and legal counsel really enjoyed working with Steve. Smart person with lots of experience in Colorado River Basin, that came from the Wyoming State Engineer's Office down the Southwest. And anyway, we have a proposed resolution for you to consider adopting. We suggest that we adopt by unanimous consent, and we'll send it on to Steve to thank him for the partnership over the time that he was there.
So moved to adopt a resolution recognizing Steve Wolf from the Southwest Water Conservancy District. Conservation District, excuse me.
All those in favor?
Next, we have service anniversaries, which we have a few of this month. And pretty exciting stuff, actually. I think we're gonna start with the longest standing employee to be recognized. Peter, do you want to recognize the sure, Nichols, you want to stand up? It's mere 25 years of service with Laura here. Which is impressive considering she's only 30 years old.
Let me do this.
See, you did too.
Yeah, well, Andy already spoiled my thunder by saying that Laura's been here for 25 years. But I asked Audrey earlier, when did Laura start? And she said in July of 2001. And so I did my crack lawyer math and I came up with 25 years. So Andy and I are both good at lawyer math, because that's what this plaque says as well, 25 years. What's actually more impressive than that is that Laura has reported to a certain supervisor for 24 and a half of those 25 years. And to be able to do that for that long is pretty impressive. So kudos to you, Laura, on that. The good part about that for me is that I can always say to Laura, when I don't know the answer to something, well, you've been here longer, you should know the answer. And often, if not always, she does know the answer. Oftentimes, I'm just convinced in the deepest part of my soul and brain, which isn't all that deep, but that there's a certain document that exists. And I must have it. I need that document right now, but I can't find it. And sometimes I'm not really happy that I can't find it. And I'll go to Laura and I'll say, where is this thing? And 9 times out of 10, she'll find it. The 1 time out of 10, she's very gentle in convincing me that that document doesn't exist. So kudos again to you, Laura, for that, and thank you for that. But in all seriousness, Laura has got a great reputation throughout the River District for always willing to lend a hand across the board, whether it's legal or anybody else that needs help at the River District. She's always very helpful to everybody with a pleasing smile, always keeping her duties to the legal team paramount. But we're very much appreciated, and help me congratulate Laura again.
Can we get Matt's got a camera, we're gonna. Yeah, we get one.
I had to write it down because, look, mine's really short. I just want to say thank you, Peter, and thanks to everybody. And the reason I had to write it down is because I'm not a good speaker and I don't want to lock my knees and pass out. Because if I keep this piece of paper here, I'll be okay. So I just wanted to tell you, everybody, that I've worn a lot of hats being here at the River District. I've been the snack fairy. I've been the baby stork, baby pool fairy. But the best hat that I ever wore was being part of the legal department. So I just want to say thank you for that, and
Here's to maybe another 25 years. Why not? No, so how about another year or until I get my pink slip? So, see, I'm already over.
And I do want to say Laura is remarkable in terms of her help in remembering people's birthdays and taking care of the staff. She's wonderful.
I'm all worked up now.
Yeah, I know. It's really awesome. Right behind her, 15 years, behind her by only 10 years, but coming up on her fast is Ian Phillips.
Don't pass out, Ian.
And Audrey's going to recognize him. Ian has remarkably been here for 15 years.
15 years, right? Ian, I've had the pleasure of working with Ian for 15 years now. Ian's what I would call like a non-traditional accountant. He escaped the world of Dalby to come down to the River District. And I remember when he sent me his application, his email address was Skiing Ian.
Still is.
Yeah, Ian, he does a great job. He came in, he drank the Kool-Aid, as he likes to say, and is really passionate about what we do. And he understands all of the numbers behind us, keep us all in line, but he also wears a lot of hats too. And I really appreciate Ian taking on a lot of roles outside of the traditional accounting box. President of the Two Rivers Park Plaza HOA, parking lot czar, all of those things. And so I really appreciate everything that Ian does, and I look forward to at least 15 more years.
Yeah, it's really crazy to just hear 15 years. I never thought I'd be anywhere for 15 years. So, I just love this place. Thank you. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Peter. It's just a very rewarding job. I didn't think I was going to get emotional. Yeah, it's crazy to think about what I've gone through in 15 years, and a lot of ups and downs, but it's even crazier to think about what's going to go on the next 15 years. What you guys are going to be talking about at that July meeting 15 years from now will be fascinating. But yeah, thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian, and I will say, his work makes, my job a lot easier. I do review the finances, I review, all sorts of things. Ian takes my crazy out of left field questions on finances and investments, in stride. It would cause most accountants to lose their hair the way I ask questions. He's like, oh, yeah, I'll look at that. No, and then he does, and it's really, really helpful, and he can pull up numbers that I need extremely quickly, and I really appreciate it. So thank you. Our next employee has been here 5 years, and I think Audrey's gonna 7. I'm sorry. No, we're going to Lindsay. Going to Lindsay. Lindsay DeFreitas, 5 years. Matt, and want to say, it is amazing how time flies when you're having fun, right, Lindsay?
That's one word for it, Andy.
Well, I would say about Lindsay that overall, the River District is stronger and better for having her here. And, she's been a tremendous colleague since I've been here, and I think she has proven over and over again just a valuable resource to everybody on staff. She's kind of become the go-to resource for so many things, including presentation preparation or just general questions about how things work or who's who. And so this is a valuable resource, and you know, the River District is full of really good people. It's probably maybe its core strength, and I think that's from leadership down, but Lindsay's a prime example of that. She generously donates her time to her community, and she's tremendously dedicated to her family and always dragging them around on crazy adventures and all kinds of stuff. So it's a pleasure to work with you, and here you go.
We got a picture.
Photo. And do a speech next. 5 years.
And Lindsay, thank you so much. We very much appreciate it. And I would say Matt's right on. There are all sorts of random things that Lindsay does and does with a smile, and she's most frequently here long before I am in the morning, and I often get in very early, so I appreciate it. Another 5-year anniversary, Stephanie Moore. Stephanie has been our executive assistant for 5 years. She is, I know that you all deal with her, so you know how great she is, and she has a really good way of reminding you you're supposed to be doing something without really annoying you, at least for me. And I really appreciate that. I love working with Stephanie. She is so capable and able to get the big picture and understand what's important and focus on it, get it done. Really helpful, and I really enjoy working with you, Stephanie, so thank you so much. Yeah, here we go. All right, well, thank you.
Thank you, guys. It's been a lot of fun. I really like this job. I'm so appreciative. I don't have to work 50 hours and my family appreciates it. I fly to Vegas every 4 months, so. I really love it.
All right. Thanks. And that brings this evening's or today's meeting to an end. We are having our barbecue out back. It looks like we're going to be clear, unfortunately, to do that outside. We're doing that at 6 o'clock. So the board, if the desires, can go check in to your hotel and then come back for the barbecue. I will just, Laura, in her capacity as Mother Hen, wants everybody to know there is one location that will be marked by a little
Caution sign.
Caution sign. We have apparently a nest of crows with a baby cronin who's pooping on some place that is central to our picnic. And so don't sit there or hold your food out underneath the nest. If you could avoid it, that would be great. There will be a sign there, but anyway, tomorrow I want to remind everybody there is an INO Information and Outreach Committee meeting tomorrow at 7:30. Sonia is the chair of that committee, but there are other members present. So Francie Jacober is on that committee.
No, I'm on the other one.
No, you're on the other one too. Yes, you're on 2 committees. Thank you. Mr. Catlin is an ex officio member. Kathy Chandler Henry, who is aware of that, and I do believe intends to attend. Raby, you're on it, and Tom Gray. All members of the board are welcome to attend. There will be burritos present in the morning for that, thanks to our staff. Really appreciate everything that everybody's doing. The hotel room should be available, hopefully, for everybody at the hotel formerly known as the Hotel Denver, Hotel Maxwell Anderson.
Hotel what?
It's called the Maxwell Anderson.
I had no idea.
Yeah, it's really better known as the formerly known as the hotel. But anyway, looking forward to hanging out with you outside. Unfortunately, Doug Monger could not make it to tonight's picnic. He's busy with trying to actually engage in agriculture. So he did extend his apologies. We'll try to get him here in October so we can honor Doug's many years of service.
That'd be great.
All right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll see you all at 6. Thank you. All right.